Welcome back to The Contrarian, everyone. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Michael Yon, a former Green Beret. Just has so much knowledge when it comes to geopolitical trends and things we're seeing around the world right now. So feel free to like, subscribe. Just let me know what you think of our conversation. And I hope you all enjoy my conversation with Michael Yon. Michael, thanks so much for joining me today. I know the world, broadly speaking, is pretty quiet right now. There's not that much going on.
For having me on. A lot to talk about. Do we have like 10 hours?
So, Michael, maybe the best way to start this conversation is just to let myself and my audience know what you're seeing around the world right now. You know, obviously, we see all these headlines, a lot of developments geopolitically when it comes to the US or even international relations, things like that. So, just let us know what you're seeing around the world right now that's standing out to you when it comes to the importance of routes and resources and how that is playing into what we're seeing right now.
Let me tell you something about, hold on. Have I got one here? Where is it? Here. Hold on. I got to show you something. Oh, man. Here it is. Look at this. This is a Japanese candle. And this is a small version. I had these painted in, the obvious colors, the Ukraine fiasco, which I warned about, and many people warned about from day one. Don't do it. It's obviously everything was wrong with going into the Ukraine war, right? And Ukraine now is effectively more or less destroyed, as many of us warned, right? And this is all about routes and resources. I had these candles made because at some point I'm probably never going to burn this one, but at some point I'm going to talk about this and burn this one, this little one, just the way Ukraine was burned. And yeah, there you go. Now I can see it. And by the way, these Japanese candles are quite intense. You see, let me talk about these candles for a minute, kind of off topic. The candles, see the hole in the bottom? This is made as a chimney for these candles so that it burns at this is a special kind of candle. It's made out of a tree here called a hase tree, and I was just at the candle factory. That's why down near Nagasaki, Shimibara, and in the candle maker, it's a family business. The candle maker, he has trees outside of his little factory, right? And so these trees are actually poisonous for part of the year. And it's called a hase tree, right? And they make great chopsticks, the trees do, by the way. And they're very hard. They make armor and stuff. But at the end of the day, this candle, when it burns, it leaves no wax. Like I burned one this morning on this. And this is the base of it, right? And there's no wax. See, there's no wax left. I mean, I just burned it like 30 minutes ago. And it's gone. It just vanishes into the air. And these Japanese candles, they last longer in the I mean, if it's windy or whatever, they'll keep burning. You know what I mean? Better than the factory made candles. But these are all so like they pick these berries, sort of berries off of these hase trees, and they squeeze out the oil, and it's a long process. This candle took like a month to make. I mean, if you were to see the bottom, it's painted though, but it's actually got like tree rings because they just keep painting it and they let it set and cool, and then yeah. And it's Japanese, man. You know how Japanese are. And I'm going somewhere with all this. Japanese are quite serious people, and but so these candles. When I walked into this guy's candle shop about a month ago, it's near Nagasaki on Kyushu. I saw one of these little candles painted with Ukraine, and I said, "Well, isn't that strange?" So I said, because all the rest of the candles are painted very beautifully with like, Japanese art. You know how good they are at art. So the candles are all, unbelievably beautiful, and except for not the ones I burn. The ones I burn are the cheap ones without painting on it. Same candles, but without painting, so they're cheap. And so I said, "What's up with the Ukraine candles?" And he talked for a while, and he said, "There's some Ukrainians here who have left the war, and they're here in Japan, and they came in and had candles made, and they use these candles for their peace movement. Anyway, it was quite interesting because I was down in Nagasaki, right? We spent about, I don't know, maybe almost a month there between a couple of trips. And I mean, I just got back. And Nagasaki, most people probably know Nagasaki because of the atomic bombings, right? And the atomic bombing was the culmination of centuries of, Nagasaki was the doorway for Japan to the world. Like when the Portuguese went full globalist. The first real hardcore globalists were Portuguese. There's always been globalists. I mean, that goes back biblically, right? But they were doing it on foot and horseback. They couldn't like fly over the seas with their horses unless there was something else going on that we don't know about, which is possible. But the Portuguese, when they took Ceuta over in Morocco in 1415, that was the first real. They just basically sailed around the corner from Lisbon and went to what's Morocco now and took Ceuta. I've been to Ceuta. I've been to the outside. I've been on the Moroccan side. It's still a Spanish city, but the Portuguese took that in 1415, and then from there, that's when it really started. That's when the globalism that we know in its current form was kind of born. But don't get me wrong, there was pre-Portugal and post-Portugal, there was still lots and lots of globalists, right? And it's just that now they had better ships, they had better navigation, right? And Prince Henry, the navigator, started his. He was a Portuguese guy, and he started, doing teaching other people how to navigate. They picked the right ships to do. Back then, by the way, Portugal was quite poor, and it was soon, and it's still tiny. It was about roughly the same borders, right, as it is today. And so they had beaten back the Moors, they had beaten back the Muslims, and suddenly everybody was alive. And so the Portuguese, they hit Ceuta, and then they started hitting all these other places, right? They're like, hey, Ceuta's good. We got lots of gold. And they, they use their spies, and they know where there's gold in the markets. It got there somehow, right? So, they used their spies, and they found out, and Portugal started getting some money. So now they could start affording more conquest. And so they started building more ships and creating more navigators, like Prince Henry the Navigator, who's famous in those sorts of circles. And now keep in mind, Portugal, as they started to expand, I'm going somewhere with this, quite amazing. And it'll end up in Japan, right? And then it ends up, well, in our backyard. But the Portuguese, they had a good start on their own. So the Portuguese had the run of it. Like there was nobody else that was doing globalism by ship at that point. Then the Spaniards, also on the Iberian Peninsula, which is their neighbor, the Portuguese neighbor is Spain. They started getting involved, right? This gets quite interesting. And then, hey, where's my giant book on the Treaty of Tordesillas? Then the Pope gets involved because the Spaniards and the Portuguese were now both becoming globalist, right? So the Portuguese had roughly 100-year head start, at least several generations head start. But then in 1493-ish, the Pope, the sixth Pope, he actually drew a border between. He divided the world into two. This part belongs to Spain, and this part belongs to Portugal, right? This is very important. It affects us today in huge ways, right? So so they divided the world into two. They were both Catholic, so the Pope, the Catholic Church, obviously didn't want Spain and Portugal fighting because they were both spreading Catholicism, which is spreading their business model too, not just religion, right? It's also a business model, right? And so there was a Treaty of Tordesillas, right? And or in Spanish it's Tratado de Tordesillas, right? And so that was 1493, and which was around the time this globe came out. This globe is called the Erdapfel. This is the oldest existing. This is a model of it. Well, this thing in and of itself is probably 200 years old. Of the oldest existing terrestrial globe. There were celestial globes, but this is the oldest existing terrestrial globe that we know of. There were globes before, but none of them seem to exist. Maybe one will come out of a pyramid somewhere. I don't know. But this one was designed in about 1490-ish to 1493-ish. The dates are uncertain, but this is it. This is an actual model of it. This is glass, and this thing itself is very old. But the actual globe that this was modeled after was right around the same time as the Treaty of Tordesillas. Remember, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he sailed right
Yep.
when that treaty was made. Right. So keep in mind. So that's why Columbus came our direction. Columbus came our direction because the Pope had drawn that line, and this was the Spain side. So Columbus shows up and he thinks Cuba he thought was Japan actually. Kind of shaped the same way more or less, but but he thought that was he thought that was Japan, and of course that was back when they thought India went all the way to the Pacific. That's why they called China East India, and all that area they called it East India, and some would call it Cathay or whatever. Not to go into that, but the end of the day. So all this stuff they dry the world is divided into two. This is why Brazil today speaks Portuguese, and it's got a lot of black people, right? Because the Portuguese that fell on the Portuguese side, Brazil fell on the Portuguese side, and the Portuguese were big into African slave trading, and they brought the black slaves over. They were speaking Portuguese. That's why Brazil is so mixed today and speaking Portuguese, because that fell on the Portuguese side. But Florida and Panama and all the rest of Latin America and Americas, except for Brazil, were all on the Spanish side. That's why we ended up buying Florida from Spain in the 1800s. A lot of people don't, even Floridians, don't realize that Florida was Spain until the 1800s. You know what I mean? It was not a state way back then, right? So that's why Mexico and everybody and all these different countries speak Spanish, because that fell on that side of the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? And then there was later amendments to these things, and there was the Treaty of Zaragoza and that sort of thing. But Japan, where I'm at now, fell on the Portuguese side, right? So now, as time unfolds, the Portuguese are getting better and better, and the Spanish are getting better and better at making these ships, which are getting better and better under sail power. They're mapping the trade winds. They're mapping everything. They're getting better at making maps. They're getting better. Like this globe, the Erdapfel globe, doesn't even have North and South America on it. It's just a blank spot, man. There's no North. This is an actual globe of the Earth in 1490 to 93 ish, when nobody quite knows. But yeah, I mean, there's no Americas even on this thing. Just think, we think we're so smart today, but only this time ago, we didn't even know North and South America existed. But it was filled with millions and millions of Indians who were speaking probably thousands of languages and dialects. I got a whole library here on Indians and routes and resources, right? I mean, this is I'm talking to you from my library, right? And so, I mean, this is what I do. Is I study and I go to these places and go out into the jungles and Strait of Malacca and Panama Canal and all. I've been doing this for years. So it's just kind of funny that only 500 years ago, we didn't even know North and South America existed, right? And so, I mean, the Indians sure knew it existed. They had huge civilizations here, and so, in any case, so the Portuguese end up coming over to Japan because they were getting better. The navigators were getting better. They were continued to do their reconnaissance and their surveys. Their mapping got better because maps are, unbelievably important, and their ability to navigate was increasing dramatically. This is why there was such research put into how to make good clocks and all this sort of stuff. You needed good clocks to do good navigation. Anyway, so they end up here. The Portuguese show up. Now, keep in mind, this is during Inquisition times, right? they were still burning people at the stake and like a lot, you know what I mean? And the Malleus Maleficarum, which I read, the witch's hammer, that came out in the 1400s, right? You know, by the two inquisitors the Catholic inquisitors. That if I don't know if you've read the Malleus Maleficarum, but it's about how to torture, detect, and torture and execute witches, right? So this is what was going on. So it wasn't like peaceful Catholics were out doing peaceful Catholic stuff. They were on Catholic jihad, right? This was a straight up crusade. This was the old days. We weren't quite as civilized yet, if we're even more civilized now. But you know, we're still. You know, I'll get to that. It's quite interesting. So the Portuguese show up to Nagasaki. They show up to Japan. And the Japanese, unlike the rest of Asia, this was a very sophisticated place, and it remains so, right? It was already quite sophisticated back then. It just didn't have the technology, right? And they were already trading with obviously China and others in the area. And the Japanese were actually good at making maps and that sort of thing. You should see some of the old Japanese maps. They're actually quite detailed, right? And but they were kind of introverted. And so then the extroverts, the Portuguese, show up and they want to trade with everybody, not just trade, they want to come in and colonize, right? And the way that the colonies work is actually fascinating. You bring over people, you take slaves, you bring over your own people and just start, they started, they called it, India. They were trying to make that little Portugal colony, right? The English ended up taking Portugal later, India later, but like Goa, they were doing in Goa, India, the Portuguese were doing an inquisition there. You know what I mean? Straight up burning people and stuff, Hindus. And so that kind of, put people off there in Goa. And show up, hey, we're bringing you the religion of peace, and you're on fire, right? And so they came to Japan as well, right? And the Japanese were like, they started calling them Nanban. Nanban means Southern barbarians, right? And so the Japanese are like, no, we want to trade with them because the Japanese are well smart enough to know they want that technology and they want the intelligence because these people that are trading around the world have a lot of intelligence, right? They're going from port to port. They're dealing with a lot of different types of people. So they want that contact, but they want it to be minimal, right? So they would make them park their boats down at near Nagasaki, right? Or at, let's say, Nagasaki, right? Where I, again, just spent about a month down there. Fascinating place. And so the Japanese, so when the Portuguese wanted to go to Edo, which is Tokyo, old name for Tokyo is Edo, right? It took them over a month to walk up they made them walk all the way from Nagasaki to Edo, right? And that way they couldn't sail their boats to Tokyo. They couldn't, come up, and just come right up because their cannons would be in cannon shot of, in Japanese, the leadership and everything. So the Japanese were keeping everything separate. They wanted to trade, but they wanted to keep it at arm's length, right? And so, and they did. But eventually the Japanese got really tired of the Nanban because they were taking the Japanese got tired of the Nanban, the Southern barbarians, the Portuguese, because they were taking Japanese slaves and they were taking them off to places like India, and they were taking them off to places, they would end up in Europe. They would end up in places like Brazil eventually, actually. And so the Japanese were like, no, we don't want that. Right. And they said, no. Right. And so, and the Spaniards and eventually the Spaniards ended up here as well, and they sponsored a rebellion, the Shimibara Rebellion. Those who might be familiar with that. In fact, we were just down talking with a priest about it just like 5 days ago in Nagasaki in his library, actually, and it's a very interesting situation. So then the Dutch came. They allowed the Dutch to continue to trade. The Japanese allowed the Dutch to continue to trade because they didn't proselytize and they didn't sponsor a rebellion. In fact, the Dutch supplied weapons to Japanese to fight the the Catholics. Of course, the Dutch were Protestants. So we're bringing our wars over, right? Our European wars, right? This is normal. Like the Revolutionary War in the United States, all these wars we had in the United States, or what became the United States, we just transplanted European wars into the Americas, right? We end up fighting France and the Spanish and anyway, it goes on and on. So so the same thing was happening here. The Dutch wanted to keep their trading post, and they wanted to get those other people out. So the Dutch actually supplied weapons to put down this rebellion and yada, yada, yada. And now you hear about the 26 martyrs. We were in that museum. That's what the library we were in, actually. But it's a private library as part of that 26 martyrs museum. But the 26 martyrs, it's interesting because the 26 martyrs, if you've heard of that, there's movies and all this sort of stuff, but and they're allegedly crucified, but Japanese didn't crucify people. The crucifixion was a story that sells back in Portugal, right? And so, we often have these sorts of stories today where you see the noose is hanging up somewhere, and people say, "Oh, white people are threatening black people," but white people never hang up nooses like that. It's black people that do it and think that that's what inevitably when they get caught, you'll notice, oh, there's the video. It's a black guy scrolling on the church. This is called it's called atrocity porn. Actually, atrocity porn is a semi-technical term at this point, right? I mean, you will always see this atrocity porn when you want to go to war, right? Like my library on Indians, right? It's huge amounts of atrocity porn we did against the Indians, right? Depredations of the Cherokee, depredations of Indians in Texas, depredations of Choctaw Indians, depredations of Creek Indians, depredations of Indians in Texas. I've got books. I've got a book, Depredations of Indians in Texas. I've got another book, Depredations of Indians in Utah. You can find these books. Look them up right now and buy them. Depredations of Indians in New Mexico. Why? Because we are doing atrocity porn to take their land. It's all about routes and resources, right? Routes and resources. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. So the 26 martyrs, where, whether or not they were crucified, I don't know. Even Commodore Perry mentions this in his books, which I have. I have his original reports to Congress. He opened up Japan in 1853 and 54. That's the U.S. Navy opened up Japan with literal gunboat diplomacy, came over with a bunch of cannons and everything else, and was like, came to Tokyo Harbor. It's like, open up or I'm going to blow the house down. It was the big bad wolf, right? The Japanese opened up. But he liked Japanese. You can see when he's writing it. I've got his original reports to Congress right here, and I was just looking at part of it yesterday, actually, and he actually liked the Japanese because once these guys come ashore, they're like, these people are quite civilized, actually, and in fact, Commodore Perry was explicit that the Japanese were the most civilized people, for instance, towards women, towards anybody in Asia that he's seen, and I think he said anybody else in the world. I'd have to reread that, except for the Christians, right? He said the Christians were more civilized to women, but he's saying the Japanese are very, practicing monogamy. The wives are not slaves. They're not chattel. They're not. These aren't harems. This is the women are treated as partners and wives, right? He actually talks about that in his report to Congress, right? But Commodore Perry was here about routes and resources, 1853 and 1854. When we were doing reconnaissance in Panama, we had a Navy reconnaissance, got lost. 7 sailors get lost at the same time in the Darien Gap where Masako and I spend so much time, died. I mean, 7 sailors died. The survivors made it out emaciated. And so that was going on. Meantime, we just had the Mexican-American War, routes and resources. We look at that painting behind you, the horse trail, routes and resources, right? I mean, it's routes and resources. And you see at the same time, this book set that I actually just bought was the surveys to build a railway between the Mississippi and the Pacific Ocean. Again, in the 1855 to 59, I think, is when those books were written. And those were done by the Department of War. The Department of War, the same one doing the reconnaissance down in Panama, the same one that sent Commodore Perry over, the same ones that do the the Indian Removal Act in 1830 with Andrew Jackson. All these guys, it's all about routes and resources. The Indians keep getting moved around. We keep doing atrocity porn against them. And we keep moving them around because, hey, we want to build a railway here. We want to build canals here. Hey, this is great farmland. We got more people coming over on ships. We're having more babies than rabbits at this point because back then Americans were having babies the way the current invaders are having babies, right? And so old American families were, I mean, they were filling up the land, right? And so,
Oh,
so we were beating the Indians through just bringing in huge numbers of people over on ships. We had better, obviously, guns. Also, we were feeding the Indians with lots of alcohol, right? Intoxicants are a main form of subjugation. This is why I go after dopehead Joe Rogan all the time and all those guys, because whether it's alcohol or whether it's opium is the big one. Opium, unbelievable. And when you say opium, most people think, oh yeah, the British, Chinese opium war. That's this much on the scale of things. It's even, I can't even see how small that is on the scale of the opium thing, right? But it's the one everybody hears about because of information war. But the opium, it was a big deal. China uses that today as atrocity porn, actually. But the Chinese were
yeah.
the Chinese were deeply involved in their own opium war, by the way, because a lot of the opium wasn't just grown in India; it was also grown up in China. Right? And so at the end of the day, all of this is about routes and resources, and it all plays into the same thing. If you look at the census of 1890, which I have right here somewhere, I was just looking at that yesterday as well. That's the first census where the Indians are counted. And where is that thing? It's on the other. I can't get to it easily, but you should see this census. I wish I could hold it up. And the census is I got books all around me, man. It's like a cockpit of study. The title is Indians Taxed and Untaxed, right? Indians taxed and untaxed. That's the 1890 census, right? And what they're doing is they're preparing to, and by this point, we've already wiped out a lot of the Indians. But so now we've already got a bunch of them taxed. We've killed a bunch of them. We've redistributed them to lesser and lesser valuable lands. And as we grow, as our population grows, we keep squeezing the Indians down even more. And then we bring up, gets really fascinating, what's called the Dawes Rolls. The Dawes Rolls, right? And the Dawes Rolls were the DAWES. Those are the rolls that the 5 civilized tribes can get on. And I've got the original Dawes rolls right here. Again, what did I do with it? I was just looking at all these yesterday. But again, I'm always moving my books around to the next thing I'm looking at. But the Dawes rolls were, after we had moved, the 5 civilized tribes were, of course, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole, right? Did I miss any? Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole, right? And so those were the 5 civilized. We called them 5 civilized because they accepted Christianity, but there was huge amounts of others, right? There were so many other tribes they're not even in the books. There were so many, right? And so the 5 civilized tribes, which had already done the Trail of Tears and all this, and now we are saying, hey, we'll give you some of your land back if you'll come on to these rolls, the Dawes rolls. And so the Dawes rolls actually, give your name and your age and some other information. And it's like, okay, you're officially Choctaw, or you're officially Creek or Cherokee or chalk. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, if you're on that roll, you can get some land. So now my ancestors, the Scots Irish, are suddenly like, hey, I'm Indian, right? I'm Indian. And so suddenly you got all these white guys that are like, I'm Indian. They're like, you don't look Indian. Well, I'm Indian. Everybody knows I'm Indian. And, I've lived out here in Appalachia forever because actually the Scots Irish were put there to actually fight Indians, right? That was part of the game, right? And there's a good book that talks about that a lot called Born Fighting, actually. And And so that's my lineage. Is actually my culture is Scots Irish, right? And it's actually my culture more than my lineage, and and which is quite interesting in and of itself. And so so suddenly you got all these white guys who are like, okay, I'll wear the feathers because I can get a lot of land, right? I'm Choctaw or whatever, right? And so now it gets complicated. So that they're dividing it by blood quantum. How much blood are you? And it gets to be like that, right? So now, keep in mind, now we're in the early 1900s, and I wish I had that thing. I wish I would have thought I was going to even talk about this. Or here it is. This is it. 5 civilized tribes. There's so many books on the 5 civilized tribes.
Okay.
This is the final rolls. The final rolls of the 5 civilized tribes. If you can find that at a fair price, get it. It ain't going to be cheap. This is the original 5 rolls. And there's a lot of old paper clips in it from somebody. They're probably been in there 100 years, these old paper clips. You want to see what old paper clips look like. But it's got all these names in here. People are always looking, the Cherokee today, they track their lineage like Mormons do. You know what I mean? Like they're very serious about lineage. Mormons are good at lineage, and Cherokees are too. Like when I needed to track somebody down about 10 years ago, I contacted Cherokee leadership, and they're like, check. Nope, he's not in. Right? They can check because they got like this and many other mechanisms to check. But and actually, I know a Cherokee guy. His original language growing up was Cherokee. There are still a few. In fact, we communicate pretty often. And he went off to special operations, and he still does. I mean, straight up warrior today, still, right? He's retired now, but I mean, serious dude. And but his first language was Cherokee language, which wasn't even a legal language until when? I've forgotten. Maybe 1930. It wasn't even it wasn't even. It was late in the game. Let's put it that way. I've forgotten the year. Somebody could fact check me on that. But it was late in the game. Actually, I was talking with him recently, and he mentioned that again. But in any case, so let me talk about Israel for a minute. Routes and resources. Why is the war going on in Gaza? Routes and resources. Why does Israel even exist? Routes and resources. During this time period, now let's go back to 1897, right? 1897. I just told you about the 1890 census here. And when 1897, Theodore Hertzel, this guy up here, this whole section's about him, right? Theodore Hertzel. And it's Theodore Hertzel, the father of Zionism, right? He was an atheist, right? He was an atheist. In fact, he wanted the Jews to become Catholic. I mean, you can't make up this stuff. And Theodore Hertzel, father of Zionism, right? 1897. He's like, he wrote his book with a whole bunch of them. But here's a few. The Jewish State by Theodore Hertzel, right? This is a classic. And The Jewish State by Theodore Hertzel. So in 1897, there he is. Here's another book on him, not written by him, though. Hertzel, this guy. Theodore Hertzel. Everybody should know this guy, right? An atheist. Remember what I told you about Scots Irish and others are suddenly wanting to become Indians. Well, Theodore Hertzel and British intelligence launched because remember, the Suez Canal opened in 1869. And suddenly that part of the world was one of the most important places on planet Earth, right? The Suez Canal, routes and resources. The whole Ukraine war, routes and resources, right? And the Suez Canal opened in 1869. Panama Canal was not open yet. That opened in 1914. The railway was going and that sort of thing. So England, let's say Great Britain at this point, wanted to United Kingdom, whatever you want to call it. The British will argue about that, and they'll give you their definitions, and then they'll argue with each other. Anyway, let's call it the United Kingdom. They wanted to, they'll get into fights about what's Great Britain and the United Kingdom. But the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland and all this, here we go. But anyway, those guys wanted to have a buffer state there. They wanted control over the Suez, right? And because routes and resources, man, that thing's a gem, right? It's one of the 7 top routes in the planet, right? Panama wasn't Panama Canal wasn't open yet. So this is, at that point, there wasn't even seven. We added Panama later. There was Strait of Malacca, of course, Strait of Gibraltar, Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Gibraltar. Did I say that? Bosphorus, arguably Danish Straits, and of course going around Africa. But so Hertzel, being the useful idiot that he was to British intelligence, so he was. Straight up. I mean, the guy's not the smartest dude in the block. He's not stupid. He's a smart guy, but he's not like ultra genius guy that started Israel. Although the Israelis are like, this is our guy. He's like, sure, right. And so in 1899 they were actually selling stocks in the Jewish state to take Palestine. I've got one. I bought it in Panama from a antique shop. I mean, they were from a Jewish guy actually runs an antique shop. I've bought a huge amount of his stuff. It's a great antique shop. I bought a lot of his books, like almost all of them on Panama, right? And so I've got an extensive Panama library actually, but the hundreds of maps and that sort of thing, because it's all routes and resources. But when you go back to Suez, and so Israel, they started selling stocks in it in 1899. And again, I have one. I physically have one. In fact, I gave it to a company yesterday to frame it so I can hold it up. So I don't have it right now. It's at the framer. And so because I found that by surprise earlier, only like 6 months ago in Panama. And I was like, wow, there it is. And the thing I've heard about, you can find them online. You can buy them online, originals, because they issued a bunch of them. And it was to start the Palestinian state. So that's 1899, right? And now, as things go on and the world continues, I'm looking at some of these books. We go World War I, routes and resources. Of course, the Fed starts before World War I. Panama Canal opens in 1914, routes and resources. The Fed, I mean, the ultimate crime, fiat money, of course, not anyway, eventually setting us up to go off gold standard and the whole works, right? All these different weapons are unbelievable. And so then we come into World War II, and the Zionists were actually openly collaborating with Nazis, and I mean openly collaborating, which is very hidden today, but it's a fact, and it's easy to demonstrate. I got a book on that right here as well. And in fact, a lot of the Jews hated Zionists. They were murdering Zionists, and Zionists were murdering Jews, right? Because Zionism is not Judaism. It's just not, right? They're separate, but the Zionists go under the cloak of Judaism. Theodore Hertzel, this dude was an atheist, straight up, and he wanted Jews to convert to Catholicism, right? This is the father of Israel, well, arguably. And so you might get the Israelis arguing now that we got the British arguing. And so then we end up with all these Israelis. Suddenly we've got all these people rushing, after the Balfour and all these different things. Israel is formed. There it is, right? So now you're doing the same thing we did to the Indians. Now you've got all this land. Hey, you can have a piece of land. You can leave Russia. You can leave Germany. You can do whatever you want. Get down there and help us fight these Indians, the Palestinians, and which, for years they're like, Palestine didn't even exist. I'm like, you were selling shares in Palestine. It's like, I've got one. It's like, they definitely existed, and they exist, right? And they were basically the Indians, right? And so, but if you want to flood in from Ukraine or Russia or wherever you're at, and claim that you are suddenly Choctaw, that you're Jewish, and actually Christians call this like rice bowl Christianity. People will be like, okay, they're giving out free rice, so I'm Christian, right? So it's rice bowl Christians. Christians call it, right? Or it's one of the names. And suddenly, my culture, suddenly we're all becoming Indians because of the Dawes rules. Well, that's what happened in Israel, right? What happened in Israel, suddenly you got all these people from Poland and Lithuania and everywhere else are like, hey, I'm Jewish. I'm like, dude, you're whiter than I am. Look at Netanyahu. Netanyahu, his name was Meliakowski. Meliakowski from Poland, right? The same name as the guy down in Argentina, right? Malay, his name was Meliakowski, the exact same name, coincidentally. And so, listen, Netanyahu is not even Jewish. He's an atheist, straight up. He's wearing the kippah and all this stuff. He's like me. I'm an Indian. Give me some land. All right. I'll wear the feathers. Right. So I get my 165 acres or whatever. And so that's what's happening. That's what happened with Israel. Suddenly you've got all these Israelis and they don't want to do 23andMe or Ancestry.com because they ain't going to have Jewish blood, right? They're going to be like Polish. They're going to be Russian. They're not, they are just, I'm getting my free land. I'm suddenly Jewish, right? A lot of them are exactly like that. Full stop. A lot of the Israelis are full core atheist as well. They're not Jewish in religion either. They're not Jewish by blood and they're not Jewish by religion. And Hebrew wasn't their language, right? I mean, they were speaking like German and Russian and Ukrainian. They were speaking Spanish, the Spartans, right? They were speaking, this is a manufactured thing, just like we did here in America. Where else did this happen? Pipes rolls, right? I talked about the Dawes rolls earlier, but there was also something in England. They called it the pipes rolls, right? King William the Conqueror in about, when was it? I can't remember, 1086 maybe. I think King William the Conqueror in 1087, something like that. The historians it's easy to find out, but he did a census as well. Of all this, so we're talking, 1,000 years ago, right? Did a census and around England to find who owns what land, how many males live there, how many chickens and cows or whatever they got, right? A normal census. That's the kind that they still do, the kind that I just saw them do in Panama in the Darien Gap jungle 2 years ago. I was physically present when they were doing census of the Indians, and they were literally counting like chickens and stuff, like right out of the pipes rolls, right? And the pipes rolls were the same thing. The pipes rolls were like the first known census of England, right? So the King William the Conqueror was counting what he's got here so he can start taxing them. So he can make them into tax slaves, right? That's his farm. His farm animals are his people, right? And so the pipe rolls, and now we got the Dawes rolls. Well, I've got the Dawes rolls, and if you want to know more about these things and the 1890 census and all these are things I just run across in my Rain Man like studies that last for decades on end, right? When I'm not off in a war or something like that, I'm in a book, and so I spent years doing war stuff and all that crap, and a lot of combat and all that. But I always come back to the books because that's where I was kind of born in a book, I think, and I'm probably going to die in one. And if you look at the pattern that's happening, I'm trying to figure out what the patterns are, and this is why we've been so successful, Masako and I, at predicting like Nordstream was going to get cut. We predicted that publicly many times. We went all the way to Germany. We went to the BASF plant in Germany, Ludwigshafen, Germany, where they started making nitrogenous fertilizers in 1914, the year the Panama Canal opened, right? Just before, right around the time the Fed was formed. Anyway, all huge stories. And so we went there, and I had an extra iPad that there was a website. You could see how many cubic meters per second were flowing through Nordstream, right? And so I had an extra iPad that I watched for months, just watching those flows. I would be working, in books and check the flows occasionally. Well, there's still so many cubic meters per second, and you can see them fluctuating depending on, I don't know, temperature or something. I don't know what, but at one point I looked over and I'm like, hey, they're at zero, and restart, go back into the website, restart the thing. Still at zero. I start calling people around, and I'm like calling around like, hey, what's going on? Looks like the flows through Nordstream are at zero. Now, keep in mind, 14 days before it got blown up, Masako and I were 14 days. We were at BASF, which is the big, they need Nordstream. And I was there with Masako. She recorded it actually on video. I I asked the guy giving us the tour of the BASF plant, the biggest chemical factory in the world that needs that Nord Stream gas. That's why we were there. And that they and I asked him what happens if Nord Stream gets interrupted or something like that, right? And he said, then we are dead, meaning BASF is dead, which is not dead, but it's definitely damaged, right? They're moving operations to China and that sort of thing. But so 14 days after I asked him that question, boom, goes to zero on my iPad. And I start calling people, and they're like, something just happened. We don't know what, right? But something clearly just happened. And then next thing you know, you turn it on the TV, and you're like, it's bubbling up from the sea. Nord Stream. Somebody blew it up, right? And so immediately, America's blaming the Russians. I'm like, the Russians? That's not the And Americans believed it. And Germans believed it too. You can't make up this stuff. Germany and Russia paid for Nord Stream to get made. That was Russia's selling the natural gas to Germany. Germany wants it because it's cheaper natural gas so they can have lower manufacturing costs and lower heating costs and a hotter economy, right? They needed Nord Stream. Nord Stream, right? They needed Nord Stream. And so suddenly it blew up. And so I'm like, well, people were asking me, well, gosh, you've been saying this that they're going to do something to Nord Stream. I was like, I didn't know we were going to do it, but I strongly thought to the point that I flew to Germany a couple times and went to BASF twice, not once but twice, and the second time was 14 days before. How did we do all this? Because of this, because of study, because of going places, because I do war. I've done a lot of war. You know what I mean? It'd be what I would do on the Carver matrix, criticality, accessibility, recuperability. Carver is a matrix for target selection. But when I did a Carver matrix for targets that I would hit, if I were trying to destroy Germany and trying to basically crumble Europe and take over Europe, I would cut Nord Stream. And I would cut Groningen gas field, which I also predicted on the Jordan Peterson show when I was on there with Ava Vlardingerbroek, right? And I was like, yeah, I think they're going to do it. And of course at that time people were like, they're never going to cut, Groningen gas field. I'm like, because people kept saying it's the biggest, most important gas field in Europe after Nord Stream got cut. And I'm like, okay, think it's the biggest, most important gas field for Europe, Groningen. And people are like, they wouldn't cut it. I'm like, think. Why? You just had the answer right in your mouth. It's the biggest, most important gas field in Europe. And you're saying, and therefore they wouldn't cut it. And I'm saying, and therefore they're going to cut it. And they cut it, right? They cut it. How did we keep getting these things right? Right? These are, by the way, if you're a multi-billionaire investor and that sort of thing, and you're paying attention to my work, you probably got rich, right? I mean, if you actually bet on some of these things, like the screwworms coming back through Panama, like China going for the Panama Canal, like the Darien Gap opening, like multi-drug resistant tuberculosis coming in, many, many things, like the hit to miss ratio is Babe Ruth. There's very few misses. We're going to go into famines. It's coming, right? I think we'll have to wait and see, but I strongly think that we're going to end up in famines, routes, and resources because we are being depopulated just like we did to the Indians, just like the Israelis, the fake Jews. How many real Jews are in Israel, right? That can trace back to some bloodline. They're whiter than we are, man. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them are. I mean, but suddenly, like, yeah, this is our holy land. No, it's your holy land because you're getting some land, just like we did in Texas and Florida from the Seminoles, and then Texas from the various tribes there. And suddenly, everybody's going to be that thing because this is the old game. It's not Jews doing it. It's not Christians doing it. It's not Hindus doing it. It's humans doing it. It's what humans do, right? We take from the weak. That's what happens. You have to be cognizant of that's the rules of the road. When you read these books, when you spend years in these books and years in wars, you start to realize if you got a lot of gold, you better have a lot of iron, right? Or you better have a good plan because at the end of the day, intelligence is important. It is very important. And I mean in every regard, right? You must study. Or you must be able to hire people who do because it's a big deal. If you're going to make accurate predictions, you're not going to be able to do it by reading the Wall Street Journal and all that Barron's and all that crap by people that don't even study. The people that are writing that stuff are working for the corporations that want to manipulate the information sphere, right? Who predicted Nordstream would get cut? Who predicted Groningen would get cut? Who predicted what's happening in Panama well in advance? We're going to war in the Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it. The Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico, whatever. It's going to be a war zone, in my view. I strongly think it will end up as a war zone. But we'll have to wait and see. Why? Routes and resources. Guyana, lots of energy off the coast there. Venezuela wants it, right? And you see now we're threatening Venezuela. Venezuela's already invaded us with all their gangsters, which we saw so many come through the Darien Gap. I'm this close to them, man. I'm as close as this camera is to their gangsters in the Darien Gap many times, making film of them, like tattoos on their faces, AK-47 next to the eye, and all that stuff, right? I mean, all these guys, right? I mean, we saw it. China is invading us, routes and resources, right? This is about. If you go back to the Portuguese, it really started getting serious with those guys. Then, of course, the Spaniards got involved. Then you get the Dutch and the Germans and the French and the English, and the English became quite good at global domination game. The game of Risk. The English got to be quite good at it. The Russians got regionally good at it. Made the Soviet Union, and which obviously eventually crumbled. And there's many players. The Belgians, how many, and a lot of small players as well, right? But I'm sorry. But as you can see, the way that the game works doesn't change. It doesn't really change. Now the technology changes, but the actual flow of things doesn't change. The actual way that people operate doesn't change. People go for the weak, and when they start, for instance, doing atrocity porn, as China is doing against Japan right now. China is doing heavy atrocity porn against Japan. I've written 3 books about it, only in Japanese, but I've been to China. I've been all over Asia. I've spent 20 years in Asia. I've been in 25 Asian countries. China, Tibet, if you want to call that separate, I guess, Nepal, India, 25, right? I spent years in, Thailand and Indonesia, Malaysia, 25 of them. I've been to almost 100 countries around the world. I've spent most of my life out of the United States, right? And looking at this stuff, studying it, right? And you can see China is going to go to war with Japan. They're already at war with Japan. They're doing the same thing here. They're invading Japan. They're invading Japan the same way that Chinese are invading the United States and Europe, the same way the Chinese are invading Africa, and now they're getting some uprising in Africa, and xenophobia, I guess, right? So you see some of the protests are in the news. I don't know if it's true because I'm not physically there, and the news lies all the time. So we're back to that Gell-Mann effect. The Gell-Mann effect, where you read something and you're like. Let's say you're a physicist, Gell-Mann, and you're reading this stuff, and you're like, I'm a physicist. That's not true. That's completely fake. And then he changes the page to something else, and international affairs, and he starts believing it. And at some point, he's like, Gell-Mann, he's like, wait a minute. I just saw that this is nonsense about physics. I turn the page on international affairs, and I just instantly believe it. I gotta throw the whole thing out. Falsus in unum, falsus in omnibus, right? You know what I mean? If one thing is false, So if it's just a nonsense publication, it's a nonsense publication. And so, so in any case, these wars that you see unfolding now, the way that they sell these wars to the masses, the real players are thinking with their brains. They're not thinking with their hearts. They're thinking with their brains, right? But they must manipulate the masses who think with their hearts, right? So they must manipulate the masses. That's where the atrocity porn comes from. So when they want to take a place, because the average Chinese is not a bad person. The average Chinese is not going to just come and kill Japanese. The average Chinese and the average Japanese will actually get along, right? So it's not going to be like, hey, let's go murder all the Japanese. They're not going to do that, right? But when you do this atrocity porn, which is intense in China, I mean, you wouldn't believe it. I spent a lot of time in China looking at this. I mean, they are creating huge hatred against Japanese. And I've never seen a war that doesn't radiate in advance. It doesn't radiate information war and atrocity porn in advance. They radiate it, man, like the sun. China is radiating like the sun right now, just like we did to the Indians. In the 1800s, there was a whole genre about white women kidnapped by Indians. All these different books, and Custer's family, and all these different, not Custer, but Daniel Boone's family, all these different um, people kidnapped by Indians, and all the things that the Indians do. And every time we're doing the atrocity porn, it happens to be along routes and resources where we want to get them off of that land, right? And so it's because, and the Chinese want to get the Japanese off of this land. So that's what they're doing. That you see, the white people have been attacked viciously in the United States and in Europe because we're scheduled for genocide. Bottom line, right? So all those Jewish people, by the way, the real and the fake, are also targeted, obviously. And the only real thing that they have to hide behind are the people like us who will actually defend them. Otherwise, it's game on. So many people have done the Ancestry.com thing. I mean, that's like the Dawes rolls. That's like the pipe rolls. That's like everybody knows who's related to everybody now, because even if you didn't do Ancestry.com, your cousin did it. And therefore, boom, it's all these. I mean, this is a targeting list. Unbelievable. Put this with the AI and the drones and all the other mechanisms that they can use, which are unbelievable numbers. Obviously they can use weather and fire. I talked with Dane Wigington on the phone yesterday for an hour and a half. He called me up, geowatch.org. Unbelievable. Geoengineering watch. It's unbelievable, these weapons that have been unfolded, but it's in service to the same sorts of things that have always happened. Spreading your corporation, you might see. Like, let's go back to Japan, Nagasaki. So for centuries, first it was the non-bond, the Portuguese and the Spanish, Portuguese first and the Spanish, then the Dutch came, and the Japanese didn't call the Dutch non-bond because they weren't as barbaric as the Portuguese and Spanish. They called, and the Portuguese and Spanish, they were barbaric everywhere I go, man. Anytime you look in the history of like Panama or Colombia, Spaniards are always just going complete savage on everybody, and they're just going for that gold, gold and silver, right? And Rivers of Gold, there's a good book on that, which I have over there in that corner. In the Rivers of Gold, they were going for the gold, right? But so let's go back to Nagasaki. Nagasaki became the biggest Christian city in Asia at the time, right? And to my knowledge, it was certainly the biggest in Japan. Certainly the biggest in Japan. I don't know if across Asia, but in East Asia. But in Japan, it was the biggest, right? And so Catholics and Protestants there, mostly Catholics, right? So now let's get to World War II. And the war with the Japanese, we did a lot. First of all, we had good relations with them, weirdly, despite all the things that had happened. We had quite good relations with them. And then you start to see a lot of atrocity porn starting to pile up in the 30s against the Japanese, right? I have a lot of it in my library, a lot of the atrocity porn. So you're like, there it is. There's your radiator right there. The Japanese are doing this, the Japanese are doing that, right? And then because Roosevelt wanted, listed whether it's Roosevelt or Trump or Biden or Obama, it doesn't matter. Those are leaves on the tree, but the organizational structure transcends whoever that anointed person of the moment is, right? Because this is an organizational structure. This is a way that humans are. So we can blame Roosevelt, but in fact, it's a human thing, right? But let's say, anyway, at the time, it was Roosevelt as the president of the United States, and he wanted Japan. He wanted it down, right? He had a lot of business interest in China, right? And so as did his cronies, right? But Japan greatly wanted to be allies with us. It was open. None of this is hidden. This is like laying on the surface. It's not even buried. But we went to public schools, which is owned by who? The corporation, right? And so we started. Roosevelt wanted to There's a great book on this called The Day of Deceit. I read the book, The Day of Deceit. It's a great book. It talks about all the ways um, that we were trying to get the Japanese to go to war with us, right? And cutting off their oil, cutting off their tin, cutting off their rubber, and doing what's called pop-up cruises, sailing our navy very fast towards the Japanese coastline, trying to get them to shoot at us, and then turning around and just leaving, and they never shot at us, right? We couldn't provoke the Japanese to attack us, and we were trying to provoke them to attack us. We needed a casus belli. We needed an October 7th. We needed a 9/11. We needed the Japanese to attack us. President Grant, I got his whole book. I got all 32 of his books of his letters. President Grant talks about this, about the Mexican-American War. President Grant, well, he became, at the time, he was a lieutenant. I think in 47, 48, I think he was 1847, 48. I think he was a lieutenant, but he may have been a captain. I think he was a lieutenant. But anyway, he was down in Texas, right? And he's talking about how we're trying to provoke the Mexicans to attack us. That's casus belli. He's like, we're trying to get them to attack us. And President Grant, or lieutenant, I think at the time, he felt bad about it. He's like, those poor Mexicans, we're like right up on the river, the Rio Bravo and all that stuff, Rio Grande. And, we're trying to provoke them to attack us. We're making a lot of noise. We're trying to show we're here. We're trying to provoke them. And anyway, we want them to do these things so we can have casus belli, right? And we want those routes and resources, right? And anyway, we had the Mexican-American War. And so and then we took all that area, Texas, and it was Republic of Texas, and then we, Texas joined us. The Republic of Texas' own country joined us, the United States, right? We did, of course, Louisiana Purchase, Florida Purchase, but the Gadsden Purchase was important for what was happening here in Japan. When did the Gadsden Purchase happen? That was 18. Help me out, historians. He got that cheaply, but that was about the Southern Railroad. This was before the Civil War, and that was when Commodore Perry was here in Japan, opening it up, right? Because we wanted the railroad to go across the United States, and we wanted to trade with Europe, take Hawaii, of course, all that stuff, and we wanted to open Japan, and they were hard to open because they were too organized and too smart and too sophisticated, and they could fight, and they would fight, right? And so they were a tough nut to crack because they weren't like all the other ones that we can divide and conquer. They all speak Japanese. They all have roughly the same culture, more or less, right? There's some variation because it's a big place, but it's mostly Japanese doing Japanese stuff, right? And they're serious people, right? And so, but meanwhile, we're opening up the trains and still working on trying to get the Panama Canal open. That Navy guys get lost in Panama. And then, of course, 1870, Seward does his recon of Panama, which I have a survey, and it goes on and on and on. But let's get back to the World War II. So now here we are, routes and resources. We provoked Japan to attack us at Pearl Harbor. We tried hard. A lot of people thought they were going to attack us at Panama. We had, because to hit the Panama Canal, and actually the Japanese strongly considered it. And later they actually were trying to do a mission. They developed submarines to do it later after the war got going. But the Japanese were like, you can see they were desperate to negotiate. It's in headlines of newspapers. They were trying to negotiate, but America did not want to negotiate. So we kept finding, just like right now, Israel doesn't want to negotiate with Hamas. They're always going to say, no, the negotiations broke down because they're clearing Gaza, right? That's what it's about. It's what the Mao would call ta-ta-tan-tan, which is talk, fight, or fight, talk, right? It's it's about, hey, we're having negotiations, and the negotiations broke down. They did something, whatever. There's no negotiation, like the negotiations with Iran. That's just a temporary ceasefire because Israel was starting to get smashed, right? But the war is still ongoing, and it's going to get kinetic again, I think. But so let's get back to Japan. In Japan, they finally attacked us at Pearl Harbor. They attacked in Malaysia. They attacked Indonesia with the Dutch. Took a bunch of prisoners. I've been down to Indonesia looking at this. They attacked in Thailand, of course. They attacked in Philippines and where else? Quite a few places. Australia. They were very serious, man. When Japanese, why weren't they our allies? They wanted to be our allies against the communists. Japanese didn't like communists. They want, and the people that the communism that was coming into Japan, weirdly, was coming through Christians. You can't even make up this stuff. There's not many Christian communists in the United States. You know what I mean? Like, I was raised Christian. We ain't communist, right? Like, I'm like, I get the hives when I get around communists, and I've been around a lot of communists, right? But not here. Weirdly, a lot of Christians in Japan are communists. You can't make up. It's all, it's a mishmash. And by the way, they called the Portuguese and the Spaniards non-bond Southern barbarians, but they called the Dutch, who were more civilized, they just called them the red hairs, right? Because they had more. A lot of them had reddish hair, right? So they call them the red hairs. It's funny, but they got along better with the Dutch. So they were more, Dutch were civilized. They gave them a little bit more privileges and that sort of stuff. And, so now we provoked Japan, just like October 7th was a clear setup. I mean, that's so clearly a setup. It's like embarrassing to even have to explain it, right? You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, you can't see it's a setup. Listen, I did a lot of combat, right? Like a lot. I mean, not just in a war. There's a lot of war correspondents that don't do any real combat or very, very little. I did years of actual combat. And before that, I was in special forces. So I have I wasn't doing combat in special forces, but I was in the Army. I was doing Green Beret stuff. And we were planning to parachute into Poland to interdict routes and resources, right? I trained for 3 years to do this in Poland, never did it. But I went to German language school. I went to a Polish language school, learned how to do all kinds of sabotage and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? A lot. It was really intense. How do you think I was able to predict Nordstream, right? It was these books and also that old training. And, what would I hit if I were them? Nordstream. Groningen, right? I would screwworms would come back, and I would come through Darien Gap. I would invade us through the Darien. I would do all these different things that they're doing. I would invade through Canada. I would invade through Bahamas. I would take Bahamas. I would take Haiti. I would take all these places, right? Eric Prince is down in Haiti right now, by the way. I just messaged him last night. Actually, he's in Port-au-Prince, but when we get down to World War II, which I ramble a lot because, as you can see, I'm usually alone with my books or I'm out in some crazy place. But so my mind is usually quiet until it gets a microphone, and then it just goes right through it. In World War II, the Japanese finally attacked us. Now, in the Honolulu Advertiser on November 30th, just 1 week before the Pearl Harbor attack, there's a headline that says, Japanese may attack over the weekend. I think that's almost verbatim. It's very close. It's a Honolulu Advertiser, and it got picked up by others newspapers. Japanese may attack over the weekend. So next weekend, they attacked, right? And then when Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, we absolutely knew it was coming, 100%. There is no question. It was in the headline of the newspaper, right? Headlines, right? We knew it was coming in so many different ways. We provoked it, and we left our ships in the harbor. Perfect photos. The photographers were there. You should see some of the perfect photos. American flag in the background, ship burning. Our people were just going to church and being good people. And the next thing you know, those dirty Japs came and attacked us. That's not what happened. Japanese were trying so hard to negotiate. We just wouldn't have it. So they finally had to join up with the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany, right? They had to join up with them because they were left alone. They were like, we don't have a team. Our team has declared war on us, and we're trying. The Japanese had been on the British side in World War I. They fought on the British side in World War I, right? And then when it came to divvy up everything, the League of Nations in 1919, right? The West was like, you're not going to get anything. And they're like, why? And they're like, because you're Japanese. I mean, it was straight up. It was naked, man. It was just like, because you're Japanese. It wasn't because, you didn't do your part. It was just like, nah, you're Japanese. The Japanese were like, what? And so that's when the Japanese started going, wait a minute. That's when American ships would come over and land then, like, with tourists and stuff, they would make the white people stay on the boat. They're like, you're treating us like you treat black people in America. So they would let blacks come off the boat and they would make the white people stay on. They're like, that's how you're treating us. And you're treating the black people the same way, right? And so the Japanese started doing an information war with the blacks in America, which didn't. Japanese are very, very good at a lot of things, but they're terrible at information war. They don't even know how to do it. They still don't know how to do it. But the Chinese are very good at it. The British are good at it. We're good at it. The Chinese are unbelievably good at information war, but I don't know why the Japanese just can't do information war. It's like white people can't dance, you know? And I've talked with people in their government too. It's like, you got to get on your information war game here, because that is the primary weapon, right? You've got to at least be able to strongly counter their information war, because this is not a joke. This is not something you can ignore. You can ignore it and you'll die. And I mean dead. I don't mean like you'll lose some money. I mean, you'll be dead and they'll be living in your house. That's how serious this is. This isn't about, hey, we want the Japanese to pay us some reparations. Oh, no. They want to take Japan straight up. The Chinese want to take Japan. Taiwan, they want to take Luchu, which is the old name for Okinawa. They want to take the whole chain, right? They want to, I mean, and they're prepping to do it, right? And they're buying up farmland all over Australia. They're doing what they can down in the Philippines. They are definitely expansionists. Salami slicing off Bhutan and Nepal and all these. I go to all these countries, right? And so and they're doing it. And their crown jewel is United States and Japan. They need to take Japan to take United States, or let's say it's very helpful. I think they can end up getting 2 for 1 on this one. And that's why they're moving hard on Panama. Panama is this to us, right? Just like Nordstream was this between Russia and Germany on economics. I mean, Russia was making billions selling the gas, and Germany is their manufacturing was cheaper because of cheap, energy prices affect all prices, right? So that's why we destroyed it, right? We actually attacked a NATO country, which would have triggered Article 5, but we're like, a NATO country, America, attacked a NATO country, Germany, and we're like, Russians did it. And so many people ask me, who do you think really attacked Nord Stream? Like, who really did it? And Germans have told me it's Ukrainians. I'm like, I told these Germans down in Argentina, and they were educated people. They were very smart, and their German is very high German, like very pristine. I could tell they've been to some good university. Ich spreche Deutsch eigentlich. I speak German, right? And so I was speaking with them in German, and I was speaking with them in English, and so we were talking about Nord Stream, and they were like, maybe it was the Ukrainians, and I'm like, listen, I'll tell you who attacked Nord Stream. It was either Americans or space aliens, right? It was one of those. It was Americans or space aliens. That's it. There are no other candidates. If I was Inspector Clouseau, it would be, what are the footprints here? It's like, I don't see any spaceships coming down. They could be living among us. I don't know. But we did it. 100%. America did it. No question about it, right? It's like, we said we were going to do it. And Misako and I were saying it on major interviews long in advance. America's going to mess up Nord Stream. I didn't know how we were going to do it. I thought we might Stuxnet it or something. I didn't know. But we blew it up. And so, so let's get back again to World War II. So World War II, it's on. Japan attacks us. It was not a sneak attack. It was headline news a week before. And then for about the next month, of course, President Roosevelt suddenly and deliberately attacked, the Empire of Japan, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, Hawaii was not an American state back then. Yeah, it was a territory that we were we were doing the Indian thing to them. It was the normal tactics that we had honed at that point. And by the way, that stuff had already happened a lot in Europe before we were transplanting those ideas and refining them in America to an industrial scale. But so then they attack. So then the Americans, remember, the big level globalists in their mind, they're thinking this out. How am I going to achieve this? But they have to provoke the rest of us through justice, through emotions, right? So they needed that attack. They needed the fire. They needed the American flag. And look at these photos of the world of Pearl Harbor. Perfect photos, American flag flying with smoke from the ship, and perfect. This is perfect information war, right? They had done persuasion, not persuasion by look at all the things that the Japanese are doing in Manchuria and all these different places in Nanjing and yada yada yada, and doing huge amounts of atrocity porn, right? I've been to Nanjing, man. You should see that museum, and that's a whole nother story. But so and so there we go. Americans are like, I'll join the Navy, I'll join the Army, let's go. And so there, and the rest were, drafted as war slaves, straight up corporate war slaves at the end of the day, when you really look honestly at it. I mean, because you could not answer. You had to carry your draft card with you, by the way. I have a few of them, of the old ones, right? The old draft cards. It's like you have to carry that with you by law, right? And so, if you get stopped, you're on a train somewhere and a policeman stops you and like, where's your draft card? It's like, you don't have it. Huh? Off to jail. We're going to figure out if you're supposed to be in the Army. So I mean, and why were we at war with Japan as an example? We were at war with Japan over routes and resources, right? That's why, Germany was doing their thing, routes and resources. All the allies, routes and resources, right? And so now we're at war with Japan, and we had properly licked them at this point. Now let's go up to 1945. Japan was beaten. They were trying to surrender. They were trying to surrender openly, right? This is not hidden. This is not conspiracy theory. The people who say that are not even in the room. They have to go back to first grade. They have to go back and just come back on a different day after doing some basic research. The Japanese were trying to surrender, right? They did not, but our people wanted to use those nukes, right? They wanted to test them, right? So, nuclear attack on Hiroshima, right? Which I just drove through on a train the other day on the way back from Nagasaki. And then days later, they hit Nagasaki, atomic attack, right? They're actually going to hit a different target, but there was smoke occluding the target, and then they diverted to Nagasaki, right? And Nagasaki, the biggest Christian city in Japan, right? Filled with Christians, Protestants, Catholics. This gets really interesting. The biggest church in East Asia was now open. It had opened in 1925. 1925. They started building it, and I was just in that church. I was literally just in it, right? So that church was the biggest church. It opened in 1925. And then in 1945, here comes an American airplane. There's smoke. There's bad weather over Nagasaki. Can't quite see it, according to the pilot. They see what they think maybe was a tennis court, and they release the weapon, right? And so there goes the atomic bomb, right? And they release it, and it detonates at about 500 meters over the ground, right? And that church was about 550 meters away from what's called the hypocenter. The weapon went off in the air, right? And so ground zero would be right underneath it, right? And I think they timed the weapon because they want the fireball to kind of do a cloacal kiss against I'm not sure what their calculations were, but I've read a lot about nuclear weapons. But if you do an airburst, they want it to be at some optimal altitude, right, to do maximum damage, right? And so, but anyway, ground zero was underneath that 500 meters, and the church is about, if you do your Pythagoras theorem, I think the church was probably 700 meters away from the actual detonation point in the air, right? And it destroyed the church, and it killed everybody in it, right? And so that was the biggest church, Catholic church, in East Asia. And the bomb went off, like, boom, destroyed it, killed everybody in it, right? And destroyed all those other churches too. And everybody's like, wow, why did they destroy this? And why did they set it off over this? I mean, yeah, there's the Mitsubishi plant and all this stuff, but why? I mean, there was other more military targets. Why didn't they hit them? Why did they hit Hiroshima? Why didn't they hit actual very serious military targets? And well, the U.S. was testing the weapons, and they were trying to break Japan, right? Break Japan's resolve. This is routes and resources. Nobody had been able to crack the nut on Japan. Japan was strong. They were trying to crack their mind, right? So they destroyed Nagasaki, right, and Hiroshima, right, and so and the church is all rebuilt. Like I was just in that church. They still use one of the bells that was there on the atomic attack. The bell wasn't destroyed. The other one bell was destroyed, I think, and the other not. And they still use that bell. I actually asked last week. I was in the church, and I said, "Can I go up and see the bell?" And they're like, "No, because it's very difficult. There's this, and you look at the ladder. It's like this tiny ladder that goes straight up through a tiny hole. Is that way up there? So if you're in Nagasaki, you can go in the church, and St. Mary's Church, which the Japanese use a different name. But St. Mary's Church there at Nagasaki, you can go in it right now. And as you know, you're right by Ground Zero. You can walk to Ground Zero in a few minutes, right? And so it was all destroyed. And and now we started the War Guilt Information Program. War Guilt Information Program. We did this. This is important because this is what's happening to the United States now as well. The War Guilt Information Program was a program to make the Japanese and the and the Germans feel like weak, wrong, guilty, dirty, all these things. They do the atrocity porn. Everything you've done wrong gets put under a microscope. Everything we did wrong, kind of, oh no, it didn't really happen, or it was in the course of the war. Nuking two cities, firebombing cities, which were even more devastating than the nuclear attacks, right? And keep in mind, I repeat, Japan clearly and obviously wanted to be on our side, clearly and obviously, right? Nakedly wanted to be on our side. But if they were on our side and still strong, they would not be our good little Indians, right? They would not be the 5 civilized tribes and all the others we put into reservations. We wanted Japanese on the reservation, right? So we firebombed them. We nuked them. We never accepted their entreaties to be, an allied nation, and that's why it happened, right? Obviously, for those who can step back and but Americans, or the masses of anybody, the way you provoke them to action is through emotion. But the big globalists, the big players, the most serious people, they're thinking in their heads. They're plotting like psychopaths, right? They're going, okay, I got to rile up all these people in Kansas. They want to stay on the farm. They're doing rodeos and stuff. They don't want to go fight Japs on the beaches of Okinawa, or they don't want to go to Iwo Jima, places they never heard of. But, you do perfect photography. All of a sudden, all the actors and actresses are like, oh, the bad Japs, and they're always doing the artwork that you never want to go against a bunch of artists, especially when they're all funded by the government. But the artists will rip your heart out with their ability to manipulate people. And I mean, I'm an artist. I mean, I'm one of the best known photographers of Iraq and Afghan wars, right? And I'm a writer. I'm an artist, right? I mean, you hire a million artists, you can do some devastation, right? I mean, there's no question about it, especially if they have general marching orders, right? And so at the end of the day, we did the War Guilt Information Program. And the Japanese, we tried to make them effeminate. We've tried to take the warrior. We did a huge book burning, had I think maybe over 1,500 or 1,700 Japanese titles were off limits. You get caught with those books, you're going to go to prison. You had to turn them in, right? And actually, but somebody hid a bunch of them, and they're doing an exhibition not far from me. I'm going to go to it. Because we just found out about it a few days ago. Because we're like, somebody must have saved these books. Because I know how Japanese are, right? They're like I am. Those books would not, at least one set would not be burned. They would be wrapped in cosmoline deep in a dry cave. You know what I mean? It's like, they would be somewhere, and with dynamited the entrance of it. You know what I mean? They would be back there somewhere, and somebody saved them, and they're doing an exhibition of them. But anyway, they got rid of all those old books that kept the old Japanese spirit, right? And then they released obviously huge amounts of other books. You own the publishers, right? You own the news. This idea that MSM is suddenly captured, that's nonsense. It's been captured since forever. MSM, I got a book right over here about how as soon as the first printing press was out, they were having laws about what could be published and not published, right? The Gutenberg Bible is the first one, right? And then Malleus Maleficarum, which I have, the Witch's Hammer was maybe the second book that was printed. That was about detecting witches and destroying them. Those two Catholic priests made. I read that book. It was unbelievable. But that was the 1400s. At the end of the day, now we're doing the same thing to Americans. So we're doing the war guilt. We're doing everything that we've done. We did do a lot of bad stuff to the Indians. There is no question about it. But, boys into girls, girls into boys, divide families, make everybody fight each other, races fight each other, all this music and alcohol, drugs, like the doper Joe Rogan pushing drugs. He's just a condom for the globalist, right? Just like all these guys. They're big in the world that most people live in. If Joe Rogan's getting $50 million for his contract or whatever, he's a big guy. But on the globalist scale, I think I was a grain of sand. He's a nothing, right? He's fungible, and if he doesn't carry the line, he'll be gone. You can take your money, you can take your silver, or you can take your lead, right? It's that simple. We destroy countries. Right? Obliterate them, right? Burn all their books, destroy and kill tens of millions of people, right? It's a globalist fight. It's Godzilla versus King Kong, and it never ends. It never ends, right? And so we nuked them. And then we did the war guilt information program, fire bombings, all that stuff. And now the Japanese, you got a lot of effeminate men who would not be able to serve well in any military. And you've got some strong Japanese men. There's still a spirit in there, and it needs to be nurtured, right? Because the Chinese don't allow this crap, right? The Chinese don't allow all these boy bands like the Koreans allow. The Japanese and the Koreans are all boy band like Americans, right? And they're all, they're always, they're all about, they don't know if they're a boy or a girl, right? You look at sometimes, and it's destroying the ability to defend themselves. Intoxicants are heavy in many of these countries, right? Japan is resistant against drugs, mostly pretty resistant. They're the most resistant culture I've ever seen against drugs, but they're not resistant so much against alcohol, right? So they have been devastated by alcohol, not as bad as Indians. We flooded the Indians with firewater. Firewater was heavily affected. Who was doing that a lot was the Spaniards. Spaniards were, and who stood up against that? It was Catholics and Protestants are like, none of this firewater crap. You know what I mean? You can't be giving alcohol to the Indians because the Christians stood up against that hard. They're like, you can't do this. This is wrong. You're destroying these people. And they did. The alcohol was like a primary weapon against the Indians. You want to take an Indian's land, you get him drunk, and then you want another case of whiskey, then just sign this while he's drunk. It's simple, right? It's an old game. There's nothing new about this. If you want to, it's the same games that are unfolding now. But anyway, we actually nuked the biggest Christian city in Japan, Nagasaki, and I was just there again for about a month in total for over 2 recent trips to Nagasaki because it's such a fascinating city. And there was Doctors Without Borders right in front of the Nagasaki train station. They were there for about a week. And we were there with them just a few days ago. And they were at the train station raising money. I call them Doctors Without Morals because I see them all over the world. I see them down in the Darien Gap and other places. Masako and I and Ann Vandersteel and others, we were running their clinic out in the Darien Gap when the Doctors Without Morals people left and the invaders were dying in front of us. I mean, they were like people with very bad heat problems. Like this one guy, I could tell he was getting brain damage. He was, and I'm like, hey, get me, bring all the water over here, right? Find everything, pour it over this guy, right? And I sent a runner off to find me a fan. This is an Indian village, 3 hours out in the Darien Gap jungle. Doctors Without Borders left, and we come in the clinic, and there's all these people like, where's the doctor? And I'm the one, our team is the one that wants to stop the invasions. And meanwhile, the Doctors Without Morals, who are the ones who are causing, one of the groups that's causing the invasions, were gone, and you can't make up this stuff. But the Doctors Without Morals, they were raising money openly down in Nagasaki last week by the train station for about a week. They just went to Nagoya, they told us. They were raising money for the jabs. For the jabs. Those are depopulation jabs. The same way we depopulated the Indians with everything. The same way we depopulated people, we're being depopulated by the globalists, right? The globalists. Who are the globalists?
Yeah, Michael, that would be helpful if you could go into detail on like who exactly are all these globalists, because we hear that so often from a lot of the people kind of in your circle, or it could be called that camp of I would just term it kind of like raising questions around who's actually pulling the strings here and there. But when you say the globalists, who exactly does that entail? Who are the globalists?
There's a lot of globalists. The globalist is not Bill Gates. It's not Trump. It's not. They're part of an architecture, right? Like if Trump disappears tomorrow, or Biden disappears tomorrow, or Obama, or any of those clowns, they are fungible. Just like Joe Rogan, they're fungible. They're nothing to the big players, right? They're part of an architectural, they're part of an organizational structure. They're just gears in a clock, right? Like, when I'm down on the border, I've been across the entire U.S. southern border. It took many months. I've been across all the way from SpaceX at the mouth of the Rio Grande to San Diego. I've been across the entire thing, right? And that's a big border. And I saw so many, I don't know, tens of thousands of people come through. And I saw Border Patrol load up thousands of them on the buses, thousands, this close to me, like feet away. And I would ask them, why are you doing this? I mean, they're like, it's my job, sir. Just doing my job, sir. That people actually still say that. They'll like have no sense of irony, or maybe don't realize. They'll actually say that. Like I have one on video in Hong Kong saying that when I confronted an English or a British policeman in the streets of Hong Kong about, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I called him the British traitor. And the British traitor was during a big, huge, violent protest, right? And I was on the street. There was a lot of tear gas that night and beat downs and all that. And I'm yelling at him. I've got my body armor and helmet and all that stuff. I'm like, the British traitor, the British traitor. And he comes over to me. It's a British policeman for the Hong Kong police working for the CCP. And he comes up to me. He says on video, I'm just doing my job. And the Hong Kongers went crazy later. That went viral. Look, he's just doing his job. Like no sense of irony. But when I'm on the border, I've been across the entire U.S. southern border. And the Border Patrol, there's a lot of great patriot Border Patrol people, but there's also a lot of them that will go, I don't want to lose my job. So you're just doing your job. You're loading the buses up that are invading our country. I'm just doing my job, sir. And everybody's just a little gear in the clock. They don't know what time, like that clock behind you. They're a little gear in the clock, and they don't know what time it is, right? In fact, they don't even know they're in a clock, because they don't know what the structure is doing, that they're a little gear in it, and we're all little gears. But if these little gears become self-aware, and these little gears start going, I'll just turn the other way, or I just won't turn at all, or I'll just pull out, right? I'll just kind of gunk up the system a little bit. If all the little gears are a sufficient number of little gears and big gears, say that'll be enough of that, then it gunks up the system. It's called, where the word sabotage came from? It came from the Luddites. The wooden shoes that they would wear, the French would, they call them sabots, right? Sabot, S-A-B-O-T. In fact, I just saw one in a museum in Japan, and a sabot shoe, and they're called sabot, right? And what do they call them in Dutch? I don't know, but in French they call them sabot. And so when they were trying to gunk up machines that were, taking their jobs, people would throw their sabot shoes into those machines, and they call it sabotage, right? With the French accent, I guess sabotage or something. That's where it came from. And so if people just say, "Wait a minute, I'm destroying myself," these death jabs that we're pushing into everybody, which is Masako, who just walked in here and walked out, she's deeply involved in the anti-jab movement here in Japan. She's with all the key scientists and doctors all the time. They call her every freaking day. I'm with her all the time, and she's with them all the time, right? They've calculated more than 600,000 Japanese have died from that. That's more than died in the atomic bombings and fire bombings combined. And there's Japanese saying that, right? I said that to Masako a week or two ago. I said, these statistics that are backed by Dr. Yasufumi Murakami and his extended team of 300 volunteers are collecting all this data and going through it and, sifting through what can be relied upon and they've got almost 26 million records now. You'll see in the news it's 18 million, but since that time, they've got almost 26. I looked at the numbers last night. I think it was 25.7 million or something. And so they're almost 26 million records now, and more than 600,000 dead. And so that's more dead from both atomic bombings and all the fire bombings in Japan combined from the jab. What's it doing? What's it doing to birth rates? We don't know, because those numbers are not going to be in those statistics. Anyway, I'll be quiet. And you might have a thing or two to say. I'm sorry, I just went on for an hour, right? How long was that?
I think around that, but it's so fascinating to hear about what you just mentioned. I mean, like, especially thinking about fear porn and what you termed it as atrocity porn. That I think so many Western countries, especially during COVID, I mean, that's kind of when I first kind of woke up, I would say, to the reality that, mainstream media has been controlled for a while. In fact, there's even a lot of controlled opposition type of media. Like, I mean, you mentioned Joe Rogan, but there's a lot of other prominent kind of controlled opposition media as well, to where it is a challenge to know kind of what is true media, what is actually kind of factually based versus what is controlled opposition. And I was curious to hear your thoughts on, like, where you see the atrocity porn right now. Like, where do you see that going? What kinds of, because you mentioned, like, you think that there will be war again in Iran, in the Middle East. You mentioned you think there will be war in Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America area. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on, like, where you see the atrocity porn pointing to next. Like, what kinds of conflicts are people trying to convince us is a good idea?
Right. Incredibly good questions. By the way, fear porn and atrocity porn are slightly different. Hey, we're going to there's snakes in there. Don't go, right? We're taught, don't go into the forest at night. There's boogeyman out there. That's fear porn, right? Atrocity porn is more directed at people. It's directed at people, like the people you want to get rid of, or even animals sometimes. Like if you want to get rid of a certain kind of animal, start talking about the rabies they can spread, or, you'll do fear porn to make sure everybody's with rabies, to get everybody to put death jabs in their dogs and cats. How much rabies are even around, in the wild in places like Florida? But everybody's got to get a death jab because it's pharma, right? It's money. And so,
Yeah.
so they do fear porn is done against animals too. Like if you want to destroy a bunch of types of animals, you just talk about all the bad stuff they do. And so right now bears are killing people in Japan. There's a lot of bears here, right? And since the depopulation is occurring, there's a lot of land that's empty, old farmland that's empty now, and there's a huge amount of deer and hogs and monkeys and the bears, man. That just like 3 or 4 days ago, a bear walked into a school and or walked up to the playground and in Japan, and the headman. These are serious bears, man. These aren't like cuddly bears. There's two types of bears in Japan, and they're both man killers, right? One just kills more men than the other, but they're both quite aggressive. And they one guy got killed about 10 days ago, I think. And so, yeah. And so anyway, but so if you wanted to do a program to, eradicate the bear, look, that's one of the reasons, by the way, we started eradicating buffalo, was to starve the Indians, right? I mean, we starved the Indians, and we're like, we got to kill the buffalo to get them off the train tracks or whatever. And there's people, at the end of the day, atrocity porn. When you see the intense atrocity porn information wars that are happening against Japan, or again, I've studied this for years. I've written 3 books about it, but those are more than 10 years old. But when you see the intense atrocity, every war that I've ever studied radiates in advance information, right? Like the War of Jenkins' Ear, right? Most Americans have forgotten about Jenkins' Ear, but that's a good one to. I need to take a note on that because Jenkins' Ear is a very interesting story. Down in our favorite place, Panama, there was a boat captain. He was captured by our favorite non-bond, the Spaniards, and Spaniards like to cut off people's ears, so they cut off captain. I think it was a captain, right? They cut off his ear. Apparently, gave it back to him, and he sails back to England, and he starts telling everybody like, "Hey, they cut off my ear." And so for a long time, I think people didn't pay attention to Jenkins. But they're like, hey, he carries his ear around in a box like a Pringle, I guess. And, he's showing it to people. And anyway, over time, he's doing atrocity porn, but it was real. They did it, and apparently they did it. And unless he just cut off his own ear by accident, but I don't think that's what happened. I think it was real. And because, his crew was there. And so they, anyway, eventually, due to wars that were already going on over there, they used that as casus belli to go to war with the Spanish, the War of Jenkins' Ear. And actually, George Washington's brother, what was his name? Lawrence Washington, he fought in the War of Jenkins' Ear in Panama and Colombia, too. Well, actually, back then, Panama was Colombia, but in what's now Panama. And so, but he fought in the War of Jenkins' Ear, actually. But that was back. I'm sorry, that was not the 1800s. That was in the 1700s. That was like 1750s, I think, right? War of Jenkins' Ear. I'd have to look it up. I'm sorry. I need more sleep. But the War of Jenkins' Ear occurred, and that was before America was born yet. So Colonel Lawrence Washington, I think, was George Washington's brother, as I recall, and he fought down there in Panama, War of Jenkins' Ear. But there was some atrocity born. That's why they call it the War of Jenkins' Ear. You cut off Jenkins' ear, we went to war, right? So there's so many forms of this, right? Like right now in Gaza, you saw that drug and sex party that was near. That's what those are. Those raves, of course. I've seen them in Thailand. They're just people get out and do their LSD or whatever and have sex on the beach, right? I mean, it's like insane parties, right? And those rave parties, right? So they're having that rave over near Gaza, and then somehow the Hamas managed to get through the most intense defenses in the world. Okay. And through the ultra supers of Mossad who can do everything. They know everything. They know the world. Mossad is the best, they say, right? But somehow they got through Mossad. They got through all the defenses. They had their go at those partiers for 7 or 8 hours, an entire McDonald's shift, right? And just imagine you clock into McDonald's 8 hours later. I'm finished with my shift, and the IDF is just responding to the attack that started when you clocked in, right? Would you keep a fire department who took 7 or 8 hours to respond to a major fire? The whole city's burning down, right? 1,000 people dead, more than 1,000 people dead. And they're like, hey, maybe we should go to the fire. It's like, no. There was smoke coming out for months in advance, and no fireman went off and said, hey, maybe they're going to attack us, right? That was clear. That was a clear, what's called a staked goat tactic. A staked goat tactic is an old tactic in war where, and like the old Pashtun people used to do this, and everybody's done it. A lot of people do it. A staked goat attack is like a tripwire attack, right? You put something out there. Like, oh, okay, I'll tell you about this Indian jaguar hunter. He told me how he got this jaguar a couple of years ago. I was with him out in the jungle in Panama. I go into his village, and he's got this new jaguar skull up on a wall drying in the sun, and it's got little ants on it. I'm like, oh, this is fresh. So I said, hey, where's the hunter? Because I'm always looking for the hunters, right? Because the hunters know stuff that other people don't know, and like farmers do. So I always go to those guys. So I'm talking with him. He's an old man, and the shot pattern for the little shotgun was like this tight, man. For all the hunters out there, it was like a silver dollar size, maybe a little bit bigger than a silver dollar, right? I'm like, how close were you to that thing? You know what I mean? And I asked him if I could see his shotgun, right? And it was a little 20 gauge, and it's a single shot that has a zip tie on it. It's one shot, and then it's a club, right? There ain't no way you're going to reload that thing in less than a couple minutes. You got to take the screwdriver out, take the zip tie off, take that one out, put that one in, put the zip tie back on, cock it, and shoot, right? It's like, okay, right. Jaguar. Jaguar is not going to wait for your second shot. So I'm like, how in the world did you get so close to that thing? He staked a pig next to the river, right? And he waited on no moon, because they like to fight on no moon. And he just waited. And, he waited till he could hear the Jaguar got it. And then the Jaguar had its teeth in it. And, he had his headlight on, the Indian did, Imbra Indian. And he said, and he won't release the pig. That's their habit. So I just walked up and popped him, right? And that was a staked goat, except he used a pig. So a staked pig attack. That's where you put, and the old Pashtun would do this with women. They would stake a woman and try to get the British to do an airstrike. They would put weapons around her or whatever. They would dress her like a man, stuff like that. So that way, so they did not during the war that I was in Afghanistan, but in previous wars, right? So they this is an old tactic, trying to create atrocity, right? So that you can say, hey, they attacked a woman, right? And that sort of thing. And so they had that party there, and suddenly, like, why did that party even get moved into that very dangerous place at the last minute? And Israelis were like, hey, why are we doing it here? This is really, really dangerous. They know the danger of what could happen. And they're like, no, have it there. That's a staked goat, obviously. And then, the magic elves of Israel, that with their super ultra Mossad, didn't see it coming, quote unquote, like Pearl Harbor, didn't see it coming, 9/11, didn't see it coming, right? And then the attack happens. And then they allow it to go on for 7 or 8 hours. And then the Israeli Defense Forces actually killed some of their own people, right? That's just a done deal. They actually killed some of their own people, right? And now you got the hostages. This is perfect atrocity porn, right? So that you can then have casus belli, cause for war, to take Gaza. This is the kind of stuff we did to Indians. There's endless books and articles in the old days about the Indians killing people and staking them and letting the ants eat them. I grew up hearing these stories, man, when we were playing cowboys and Indians, right? And, we were playing cowboys and Indians. We were still being taught to fight Indians. I never even saw an Indian until I was an adult. We were still being taught to fight Indians, and you know what I mean? You can see some of my old photos as a kid. I'm wearing, Cherokee headdress. I'm like 4 years old. It's like I remember playing cowboys because we're being taught games to fight, the bad Indians, right? And so we killed off all their tribes, and then we named things after them, like Apache helicopter, which the Israelis used Apaches to kill some of their own people, right? So we named all these things after the Indian. The Powhatan, the first English war, the Anglo-Powhatan War, started, with the Powhatan Indians near Jamestown, like 1609-ish, right? Something around there. And one of the ships that Commodore Perry brought to Japan in 1853 and 1854 was the Powhatan, by the way. So anyway, but anyway, at the end of the day, that was a staked goat. So the Israelis were having that party by Gaza and doing whatever the Israelis do. I've been with Israelis a lot. I traveled with Israelis a lot in India, in Nepal, in Thailand. I'm very familiar with how they roll, right? They get wild, they go crazy, right? And they're doing their thing. And they love to do drugs. They're heavy on drugs, right? And especially all sorts of cannabis and all kinds of things. They just go wild, right? And so they're having their wild party. And then the gates of hell open, and the IDF lets them attack. Now, keep in mind, again, I was in special forces, and I did years in war as a war correspondent. I did more combat than any living American war correspondent. Nobody even comes close to my knowledge. I'm quite familiar with American modern combat, right? When it comes to that level of combat, not naval combat and all that. I didn't do any of that. But when it comes to this sort of war, I'm very familiar with it. And when it comes to like how long it takes a Black Hawk to get off the ground, 4 minutes, right? A slow crew, 6 minutes, right? A very slow. Imagine a fire department that takes 10 minutes to get out the door. But a Black Hawk can go from cold, not even hot cocked, not even everybody strapped in. But I've been on QRFs, like as a war correspondent. And what happens is the guys sit by the, I've been on QRFs that come by the ground and QRFs that go by air, right? I've been in helicopter QRFs and I've been on many, many ground QRFs, right? And helicopter as well. And this is how it goes for the helicopter people. They sit around, they're on QRF, so they've got their body armor right there, and they're playing video games, reading books, watching, soap opera or whatever. And then alarm comes in, the headquarters will be the next door, right? Like, let's say I'm in the headquarters room and all the soldiers who are on QRF are right out that door, right? So I get a call come in, the radio, I'm the commander, and it's like, okay, QRF, get it, launch, right? And it's, get on. They'll just open the door, get it, and they'll just run out that door. There they go. And the next thing you know, you see them pop up on the screen. There goes your helicopters, because we got the drone overhead doing the down feed. There goes lighting up the enemy, going down, doing whatever, right? Or they're doing QRF or they're doing medevac or whatever, or CASEVAC, depending on. And so I've been on many of them. And how long does it take to get the Black Hawk off the ground? 4 or 5 minutes, right? And they go 180 knots, right? Israel is small. They should have been in combat within 20, 30 minutes, right? Max 30 minutes. If it took them 30 minutes to start slinging lead, they should be fired. The commander should be fired. You imagine a fire department that's like, we were kind of busy that day, couldn't get there. Man, if I were a soldier in Israel and they were shooting up the neighborhood right there, I would grab my weapon and I would be going to the action on a bicycle. I'd be riding my dog over there if I had to. I'd be going on a skateboard. I'd be stealing a car. I'd be like, get out of the car. Sorry, I had to take your car. Here's my name. And I'd be going to the fight, right? That's what I'd be doing. And that's what all my special forces buddies would be doing. We would get to the fight and we'd start slinging lead. You know what I mean? Because they're killing your people. I'm not going to wait for a plan. Here's my plan. We've already planned for this. This is called action, right? Lights, camera, action. They're killing our people. Go engage, right? And get in it, right? Get between them. And then other people will come later with more. You got to slow them down. You got to get them, slow them down. Your job is to just get there and slow them down. Kill a few if you can. Make them go slower while more people come. Get to the action. More people will come, but you get there first. Sling lead, right? And, some people say, no, you don't understand how it works. They have to get out of here, man. I did so much combat. That's how it would go. And QRFs I was on, you get it, and one of our units gets into contact and it's getting overwhelmed. The plan is made while you're driving to it. You hit this bridge, you get that one, you get that corner. We'll dump right here and smoke these guys. They're right here, right? Block them down. Don't let them get over that way. But you're making this plan. It's happening over the headset while you're in the vehicle going there, right? They're looking at the Blue Forces tracker and all this stuff, right? We're watching how it goes, right? And aircraft, going, it's fast. It's fast. And it took 7 or 8 hours. That's a lie. That was a lie. That's casus belli. They murdered their own people. Israelis who are not even Jews murdered their own people. Some are, but a lot of them are not. A lot are not. Netanyahu's an atheist. Just like Theodore Hertzel, Netanyahu is an atheist, right? And they used the Jews as useful idiots. They used them as useful idiots, or let's say the Jews, the Israelis. They used the Israelis as useful idiots, and some Jews as well, to create Israel because Suez Canal. And now there's a lot of gas off of Gaza. And there's the Indo-European corridor that goes from Mumbai, India, over through UAE, through Saudi, through Jordan, and it'll go right out through Gaza and Haifa, right? And they want to build the Ben Gurion Canal, right? Routes and resources. The Gazans are in the way. And right now, as of yesterday, the Israelis are going they're going to salami slice off of West Bank as well. Of course, they're going to do that. They're going to take. I've said this for many times. They have to take Gaza first. Before this started, they have to take Gaza. They need to knock out West Bank, right? They got to shore up that area. And by the way, the previous CENTCOM commander who just retired, Eric Kurilla, right? I know him. I did 5 months of combat with him, right? And in fact, he got shot right in front of me, like feet away. You can look it up. Michael Yon, Eric Kurilla. That's the one when Bruce Willis, the actor guy, reached out to me, wanted to do a movie based on actually my life, but I said you should do it about Eric Kurilla because he saw this firefight. I published about it. It's called Gates of Fire. Look up Gates of Fire in my name, and you'll see the dispatch where Eric Kurilla gets shot. Eric Kurilla then later became Ranger Regiment. He got shot 3 times right in front of me, right? Broke a femur in half and all this stuff. He kept fighting, super stud. And then very competent, very smart, very courageous, very shot that day right in front of me. And I was shooting photos at 5 frames a second. So I've got him being shot. And I'm shooting photos at 5 frames a second while he's getting shot 3 times, right? So you can see him getting shot, rolling in the dispatch Gates of Fire. That's the most intense photo sequence I've ever seen in war, actually. And I happened to be the one that shot it. I didn't even realize that. It didn't even quite dawn on me until somebody, a war writer, told me later. He goes, "You just captured the most." He only told me this a few years ago. He said that was the most intense war series ever shot in war, because I've got him being shot, and then I've got a bullet hitting right close to me. Very close. The bullet is hitting off the wall, and I've got a photo of it. I got a photo of this close. It's happening right over a lieutenant's head because the lieutenant went around the corner. He's shooting, bam, bullet hits. I got the bullet. I got not the bullet, but the dust flying off the wall, right? And it's big, right? And then I've got hand-to-hand combat, all in the same photo sequence. And then I had to get involved, and I had to pick up a rifle and fight action. But at the end of the day, I know Eric Kurilla. He was the first one. Well, he was the second one shot that day, but he was the first one shot in that firefight. And Daniel Lama had been shot earlier in the neck with a sniper, and we were responding to that on a QRF. Actually, come to think of it, we were doing QRF, and so it's sort of a QRF. I was with the commander, and we end up in that firefight. Eric gets shot, hand-to-hand combat. I made a lot of photos. Then the other soldiers came, and I gave the rifle back to the owner, and then I kept taking photos, right? And Eric Kurilla ended up becoming the CENTCOM commander. He was the guy just bombing Iran. That's Eric, the one that got shot in front of me. He was the commander of those bombings that just happened in Iran, Eric Kurilla, right? So if you look up my name and his name in Gates of Fire, you'll see him getting shot, right? And so, but you know, Eric became a jab pusher, unfortunately. That's unbelievable. And so, but when it comes to atrocity porn, it was constantly going on. You remember the photo of the baby killed by the bombing in Iraq? I made that photo, right? And then the U.S. Army used that as atrocity porn, but they didn't have to because it just went like wildfire on its own. It had legs, right? And that had its own legs. Iraqis saw it, and they started giving intelligence to our military, and we were using it to target and kill Al Qaeda people. Right. The photo that I actually took, it's a photo of a soldier carrying a baby after we got hit with a car bomb, and the unit that I was with, I was actually at a distance, and we responded to it, sort of not really a QRF, but we were actually on a related mission, and they got hit, boom, and we respond very quickly. And that baby Farah died, unfortunately. But that was used as war propaganda as well. But it didn't actually, it was real, though. It was like quite real. It wasn't faked, or it was completely authentic. And it had legs on its own. So, I mean, some of the war atrocities are quite real, right? But at the end of the day, Israel is doing their best to make Iran to look like the worst people on planet Earth. And the Gazans, of course, Israel bombed churches and everything else in Gaza. It's not like, you know, and the biggest Zionists, by the way, seem to be Christian Zionists, not actually A lot of the Zionists are actually atheist. Like I took Brett Weinstein to the Daring Gap. He's a Zionist, but he's atheist, right? And a lot of the Zionists are Jewish, and a lot of the Zionists are
Okay.
Christians. I think most are Christian, but actually there's Muslim Zionists as well. Like a lot of the Kurds are Zionists, but they're Muslims. I've been out with them a lot. I've been out with Kurds a lot, and they're total. Some of them are total Zionists, so it's not like the Zionists try to make it sound like Zionism is Judaism, but that's their information war cover. That's their Kevlar, right? In reality, the people that run that show mostly are atheists, right? And again, Theodore Hertzel, he wanted to make all the Jews into Catholics, right? And that's the father of Zionism in 1897, Theodore Hertzel, right? And so, but when it came to what happened on October 7th, now the hostages are there, and of course the Israelis don't want any hostages back. They might want some to dribble back if they're even there alive. I don't know, because what they need is hostages. They need casus belli to continue the genocide, right? Because it's about routes and resources. That's what it's
Mhm.
about. But the common people need to be riled up. So the thinking people are manipulating everybody else and going, well, who do you want? The Muslims? Who do you want? And they killed all those people at the party. Yeah, they killed a bunch of people at the drug and sex party that was clearly set up by the Zionists, right? Clearly and obviously, right? It's like 9/11. Somehow we missed that coming, right? Somehow the USS Liberty got swept under the rug, right? These sorts of things are common in warfare. America's done them for centuries to the Indians and to the Mexicans, and then the Mexicans do them too. It's not like the Mexicans are innocent victims. They victimize as much as anybody. I mean, it's not like there's an innocent victim in this story. You know what I mean? Notice I'm not saying who's an innocent victim and who's not. I'm talking about the human propensity to the powerful one is going to take from the less powerful one. That's one of the things a lot of these wealthy people in the United States need to understand now. You're relatively wealthy and powerful within an architecture that protects you. But when this architecture breaks down, all that wealth is a pork chop around your neck. It will be taken from you first, right? They'll blow down your door, right? You ain't going to be able to call 911. And besides that, the police might be illegal aliens blowing down your door, right? They might be in police uniforms blowing down your door, coming to kill you and take your stuff, right? That's how this really goes historically. That's how it actually happens, right? So if we lose this fight, a lot of these wealthy people that have a lot of money now, they'll lose their lives, right? And this is like straight from Machiavellians. This is straight from the Prince, This is straight. This
Wow.
is hardcore reality. And if you've got a lot of gold, you better have a lot of iron because the guys with the iron is going to come for that gold. Whether that gold be land or your women, they'll always come for your women. If you got pretty women that they want, the Kurdish told me so many stories about how the Iraqi Arabs came and took all the pretty girls and they never saw them again. And I was with so many Kurdish families, and they would always tell me, "Oh yeah, they took my sister because she was very pretty, and we don't know what happened to her." And there's so many Kurdish stories. I'll tell you, they took, and they'll always say they took all the pretty ones, right? And yeah, I mean it's horrible. I mean, women are a natural resource that men take, right? And that is what will happen. This isn't like a maybe or a conspiracy theory. Just spend some time going through these books and you'll be like, there it is again, Guatemala. There it is again, Colombia. There it again. There it is again. All these different places over and over and over.
So there's
And
nothing new under the sun, obviously. I think that's kind of
nope.
a major thing you're pointing out, obviously, is that there's just nothing new. Human nature doesn't change, although technology advances. I guess the main question now is for you, like, where do you see the American empire going? Is it in a kind of irreversible collapse at this point? Is there some salvaging of the U.S. Republic, if it could be called that? Yeah. Do you have optimism or no?
Really happy despite the things that I
Okay.
know and suspect, and
Okay.
but I think about this every day, and I think I'm very careful with my words on what I say because I know a lot of key people listen to them, and then they repeat them, right? So I have to be very, very cautious that we're not, you know, talking over a table alone, that we can discuss things without. Uh, but how? And so I'm very cautious in saying this. But it looks to me like Europe, for instance, has clearly crossed the Rubicon. You go to Netherlands, Ireland. I've been to all these places quite a lot, and um, all over Europe. And I lived in Europe for 6 years back when it was much better. And the white people, Middle East, that's Europe. And but now they've been thoroughly invaded. And you can see like King Charles. I mean, he's a babbling idiot, right? I mean, the royalty is like what is captured, right? And the government's captured. Government of Ireland captured both of those governments, right? One, anyway, not to go into that, but of course the Republic of Ireland, Southern, captured. And I was there a few years ago looking at this, warning about it, and Japan is going that direction, big time. United States, now where are we at? Canada captured. Canada's gone, and that's our that's a huge border, bigger than our southern border, right? And it's completely porous.
Would you say Canada has been captured exclusively by the CCP, or who has captured Canada, in your opinion?
It's China and India are taking it, and then others as well. It's like what is AIDS? Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, right? A syndrome, right? So what is AIDS? It's a definitional thing actually, but at the end of the day, what actually kills you is not AIDS. You've got a weakened immunity, and all the diseases come get you, right? Or all the predators, right? You're weak, and what's going to get you first in the jungle? Well, here comes a jaguar, got you, and here comes the ants and the bugs and the vultures later. I mean, so it's opportunistic. When you're weak, you're going to get opportunistically invaded, right? And that's what we did with the Indians. That first Anglo Indian War with the Powhatans in about roughly 1609. They were strong at the beginning. They did that big atrocity in 1622, which the English were like, they did this big atrocity, because they killed at Jamestown, the Indian massacre. How many Indian massacre stories are there? It's like thousands, I think, right? And it's like I don't even know how to categorize them. But or the depredations of the Indians. They always like to call them depredations, like in the reports to Congress. And, like they'll detail all the depredations. But where is America going? That was your question. And I published this 5 years ago. We're already past a Rubicon that things are not going to go back the way that they were. They just are not going to. That's not what happens anyway. That's not how time works, right? I mean, things are always evolving, right? We're not going back to Leave It to Beaver 1950s. That's over. Just like we're not going back to silent movies of the 1920s, right? It's over, right? Um, it's going. Demography is a huge part of your future. Our demography has been intentionally disrupted by, part of it is by HIAS. There it is. I got a book on HIAS. Let me show you. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They're one of the main parts of our invasion. And in fact, Alejandro Mayorkas was a board member on HIAS. He was a board member, right? And this is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. This is called Visas to Freedom, The History of HIAS by Mark Wischnitzer. And the dramatic story of 7 decades of rescue work by the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, illustrated. And when was this published? Yeah, HIAS. I'm out with HIAS all the time. I almost rented the office that they have in the Darien, but they got it before me. And so this book was, where is it? Anyway, it's the history between 1873 and 1952. Oh, no, sorry, that's not the history. That's not the years of the history. It's anyway, it's a very interesting book. But these are one of the main invasion forces. And they're not the only one, but they're one of the main ones. And Alejandro Mayorkas, keep in mind, Alejandro Mayorkas, I was the one who made video of him inside one of the camps in Darien. That was me, right? I waited for 4 days for him, right? And because I got information that he was heading there, so I just waited. I was like, well, if he comes, I bet he'll land in Blackhawks right here. So I waited there for 4 days. And sure enough, here comes 4 Blackhawks and landed right in front of me. And I was like, I predicted it, but you're always surprised when it actually comes true, even though that's what I thought would happen, enough that I waited for 4 days and just read books and waited. It wasn't like I was wasting time. Nothing came today, nothing came tomorrow, and there they are. There's Mayorkas, right? And he comes to one of the camps right beside the HIAS office. He used to be a board member on HIAS. Then he became the director of Homeland Security, right? So he was the guy in charge of the invasions of the United States. He came down to Darien with the HIAS people. If you go to HIAS.org, HAIS, HIAS, HAIS, HIAS.org, if you go on there to their website, you'll see that they have a congratulatory letter to Alejandro Mayorkas. His background is he is the child of Sephardic Jew immigrants who came from Cuba. And then that's why he was on HIAS, right? And so then he got in charge of Hebrew, so he was a board member at HIAS. And then he got installed into Department of Homeland Security and helped tens of millions of people come to the United States, right? So he was actually part of the war against the United States. Straight up. A board member on the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is one of the main combatant commanders of the invasion of the United States. These people helped do it. They still have an office right by Highway 1. Go down to Darien. Before you get to Metati, there's a little hotel called the Tenose Hotel. You'll see a dirt road. Go down that dirt road. HIAS is 70 meters on your right? They're behind the fence. Orange building. And if you get to the end of the road, you're at the China camp that they help oversee. The end of the road is like 40 more meters away. So that's, if you're in Panama right now, go down Highway 1, head to Darien. Before you get to Metati, take a left at the Tenose Hotel, that dirt road right beside Tenose, and go knock on HIAS's door, which I've done, right? I used to have breakfast with them at the Tenose Hotel, right? So I'm quite familiar with them, right? These are the guys that helped all these people that are raping and killing in the United States. These guys, HIAS, openly helped them. I have records of over 1 million people that came through the Darien Gap. I got their names, their birthdays, countries of origin, relations to other family members who came with them. The guy who killed Lake and Riley, Jose Ibarra, he came through. HIAS helped him. He came right through. I got the record. He came up and killed Lake and Riley. HIAS helped them, right? And who else helped him? Catholic Charities, of course. And then Norwegian Refugee Councils, Doctors Without Morals. They're all there. They're all right there in those camps, right? That he used to come through. Then his 2 brothers came through months later. I got their records too, right? A lot of these people you see getting killed, and then they put the records they put the names of the migrants who came in, the invaders. I look up in the records, boom, there they are. Many of them. I'm not even publishing them. I don't have enough time, right? But I mean, I published the Lake and Riley one. I published that before. I published exactly when he came in. I published the bus that he got on. I mean, I know where he came in, what date he came in, what bus he got on. He came in without a passport, right? When he came in through Darien Gap, on the record it says sin documento, without documents, right? And so this is the kind of thing we're dealing with, right? And it's in the open. And you can't get that one guy. What's the guy that talks real fast on Daily Wire? The jab pushing dude. What's his name? Yapping Dog Shapiro. Yeah, Yapping Dog Shapiro will not denounce HIAS. He won't denounce them. And if you look at the donors, there's a lot of Shapiros on there. Actually, if you go to HIAS.org, you can see the donors. And there is a Ben Shapiro. It may not be him. And he said that he's never given money to HIAS. He said something like that. But he said it in mealy. Look, I'm a writer, and I know what clear writing looks like and what mealy mouth writing looks like. Mealy mouth is the way that he wrote it. Apparently, he wrote it on his Twitter. It's written in a way that it could be, I didn't do it. My secretary did it. You know what I'm saying? It needs to be explicit. Yeah. He did not write and he's educated enough. He went to the right schools. He knows how to speak English very well, and he knows how to write clearly. He did not write clearly. That indicates to me that he is lying. I don't know if he's lying, but that's the way I read it because he's too educated to make that mistake, right? I don't give him the benefit of the doubt, and I published it many times or numerous times that state it clearly. None of your money went to HIAS. Don't say I didn't do it. Say none of my money went to HIAS. No money associated with me went to HIAS. Say it very crystal clear. There is a clear break between me and HIAS, and I denounce HIAS. He won't do it, right? Right? He won't do it. And HIAS is, listen, as soon as October 7th happened, I was in Darien when that happened, right? They had just announced they're going to open the flows wider into Darien, like adding from about 60 buses a day, I think it was, to about 200, right? And then October 7th happened. I think that announcement may have been October 6th. It was the Costa Rican president, the Panamanian president, and somebody else. They went down to the Darien to one of the camps that I go to a lot, and called Lajas Blancas, and they made 3 helicopter landing pads, and they landed in 3 helicopters. And anyway, but so then October 7th happened, and I was down there with Ann Vandersteel and Masako Ganaha and others, and I said, you know what? Gaza is going to come through the Darien Gap. They're going to come to America, right? And sure enough, they're starting to get. You saw there people are going crazy on the internet right now talking about, hey, the Gazans are flooding into the United States. They're not flooding through the Darien right now, although they did start to do it. But they're coming in on airplanes. So they're doing the genocide and squirting them out destabilization style to the United States. So the genocide is the highest people that are intentionally destroying the United States. They're intentionally destroying the United States. And they are getting a twofer for their money in a sense, or even more than that. But because first they're destroying Gaza, and then they're using the Gazans as weapons, right? And they're getting money for all of it. I mean, so that's more than a twofer. I mean, they make money doing this stuff. These people get paid. They get paid big time to help these invasions. This is big industry, right? Yeah. So this is a big artful thing that many people can't understand because they look at it on a small scale. They're like, no, it was October 7th, and therefore they're thinking like a child. This is a cathedral of stuff going on. But behind all this is a thought process, and it is a thought process. It is not a thinking process. It's not a feeling process. It's a thought process. It's the mechanics of this, and it's artful. It's like a huge cathedral of information war and actions, which is not beyond anybody's understanding. It is not beyond the average person's understanding. Like it may sound overwhelming when I lay these things out, but I'm just laying out some of the fact pattern, which would take a year to really do it. But you don't need all that. You don't need to know when you walk into a great work of art that this took a lot of effort and skill to do. That's obvious. It's a huge painting. It's unbelievable. But what you do know is it's an artwork and it's designed to do something. What's it designed to do? It's designed to make me feel a certain way or whatever, or act a certain way, or just to sell the art or whatever. I don't know. But what we're seeing with these processes that are unfolding, like the fear porn and atrocity porn and all these different things, they are part of an architecture of war that you're not going to understand in a week of study. You just won't, because it took centuries, if not millennia, to develop these processes. Like, when you're making these big buildings and big bridges and stuff, all this technology that went into that, like the arch, and the metals and the concrete and the cement, all these different things, those took centuries to develop and then combine into these art forms that we see of architecture, right? The dams that we built. You don't just build a dam overnight. That's a huge amount. So these architectures of war that we see are like that. It is a cathedral of things going on, right? And you can understand it. You're not going to understand how to build it yourself but you can understand basically what it's doing and basically how it works. That's not beyond an average person can't understand this if they, first of all, you have to divorce yourself from feelings. You have to look at this as objectively as possible, right? You have to be as objective as possible and go, what are the actual fact patterns that I see through space and time? One of the fact patterns is weak people take, strong people take from weak people. And that's why I keep telling the Panamanians, these are your last of your good days. Panama is one of the most important places on earth. This you are a lamb, a defenseless lamb with a pork chop around your neck, right? With a bunch of pork chops, and you're surrounded by predators. China, Zionist, right? All Russians have a huge embassy there. Venezuelans are significant presence in Panama. There is a Iranian presence is quite significant in Panama. Chinese presence is intense and increasing in Panama. You got all the predators to the table because everything is on the table at Panama. It's got great gold, it's got energy, it's got lumber, it's got copper. Copper is the new gold in a sense. It's not that high of a price, but but I mean, copper is very important for the things that are going on these days, and there's huge copper there and very nice gold, like high levels of purity, right? There's songs about Panamanian gold, right? And poems and that sort of thing. And it is location, 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 and the Panama Canal, and they're building the train. They're going to build a train eventually through the Darien. People often say it's impossible. They can't build it because of blah, blah, blah. Seriously, you're not in the room. You know what I mean? It's not impossible. It's child's play to build a road through the Darien. It is child's play. It's harder to build a road through Louisiana, right? It is easy to build a road through the Darien. The reason that there's no road through the Darien is because the Panamanians call it Darien. They call it Tampon del Darien, the tampon of Darien, the plug of Darien, right? Because our government, the U.S., wanted to keep that as a buffer so that Panama, it's a defensive zone. That's why there's no roads. It's a biological buffer and a military buffer. China is, I'm telling you, I'm personally the one that found the two bridges that are being built down there that are pointing towards Colombia, right? I mean, and Masako, who just walked into the room, she's been down to the Darien probably 15 times. She's seen those bridges many, many times. That they're building them. They're building the road. They're building it to Colombia. It's child's play. It's child's play to build a railroad there. The reason that there is no road or railroad there is because nobody built it. That's the reason. It's not because it's difficult. It is easy. There's energy there. There's the route. The route is as valuable as the resources. But the resources, there's billions of dollars worth of trees there. It's filled with gold. It's filled with the place in itself. If you look at the Caribbean side, that place is like a Hawaii. I mean, that's where the Kuna Indians live. That's like Hawaii. I mean, the Kuna Indians are being subtly and slowly genocided, but it's the subtle genocide, right? They're hitting them with the global warming. You have to leave the islands or you'll be flooded. We're making these other houses for you on the mainland. They're taking their land. They forced them all to jab, or not all of them, but a lot of them jabbed. And the Imbara Indians that I'm out with all the time. I'm out with the Kuna sometimes, but usually I'm out with Imbara and the Wunan, all those guys. The Nobe Bugle, I don't go out with them because they're in a different part. When I go back, I probably will, but that they're all being, just like these Indians here in my library, the same. But the thing is with those Indians, a lot of them are still living in the old ways or relatively old ways. And so it's really interesting because by the time I was born in America, the Indians living in the old ways were really pretty extinct, right? There may be a little bit here and there, but it's pretty much extinct. But still out in the Darien, there actually were some that were living much further, at least 1800s, right? They're at least at that level, right? They're not like 1400s level, living in trees. There were some living in trees out there back then. You should see some of the artwork of the Spaniards coming in the 1500s, fighting the Indians up in the trees. They got like shields and the Indians are throwing rocks on them and stuff. Yeah, they're like chopping down the trees while the Indians are in the trees. It's hardcore, man. But so what I'm getting to is Panama, they're weak and they're sitting on piles of gold the most incredible route, Panama Canal, and that train that can be built to Colombia. I mean, I don't know. I've told serious people in the Panamanian government, I'm like, you better be very smart and very unemotional in your actions because somebody's coming to take this place. You don't have an army, and it's going to be somebody. You should side up with the United States. Of course, that sounds self-serving because I'm American, but not like I'd make any money on it. But I don't want my country. I don't want the Panama Canal to fall in the hands of China, right? Um, and I think they would be. The thing is the Panamanians. We created Panama. The United States did, right? Panama used to be Colombia, but when we wanted to make the canal, Colombia is like, you're not going to be able to make it. So we created Panama in 1903, right? In November of 1903. So we created Panama so we could make an agreement with Panama to make the canal, right? So it's the Republic of Panama, and it was self-governing actually, but they used the dollar and that sort of thing. So it's quite, out of all the Central American countries, it's definitely the best one. I mean, like Panamanians aren't rushing to America. Panamanians aren't like, hey, let's all go to America. I mean, there's Panamanians in America. I like Panama. I like Panamanians quite a lot. But why would they move to America? You got Americans moving to Panama, right? I mean, there's Panamanians that move up to America and then move back to Panama. And then others stay in America because they like America better or whatever. They get married or something. But, they look at us more like cousins usually, like a crazy cousin, like a crazy radical cousin, basically, that doesn't quite know what it's doing, but it's got very big feet. Like one Panamanian guy, he's a big businessman. He's like, where's Bigfoot? Go back to Washington and tell your people that Bigfoot needs to come back. He's talking about America. And he'll say, yes, you did some things, but we need you here. We don't want China. We can get along with Bigfoot. Bigfoot, they're like, they talk about us like we're cousins, but a little bit crazy. But on the balance of things, we were a good cousin for a long time. We were on the balance of things. It was very beneficial for Panama. Very, very, right? And then we gave away the canal. Read The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. Read that. Why I've got a whole library on Panama, and it's a that I made. I've spent so much time studying the history of Panama and how this happened because it's related to all the other things, right? It's part of the larger components like Strait of Malacca and what's going on in Thailand and all this stuff. It's all related. What's going on here in Japan. Japan is a key component. I'm not here randomly. Notice I'm not living in northern Canada out of the action. When I set up shop in Texas, people are like, yeah, you're moving to Texas because they think that I've then given Texas the seal of approval that it's a safe place to be. I'm like, brother, if I'm setting up shop in your place, you should probably be selling your land. You know what I mean? I'm a war correspondent. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not going here because I'm not spending so much time in Panama because I love to hang out with the Indians, which I do. I love hanging out with the Indians. At one point, I was eating with I was just me. Sometimes I'm alone out there with them. And one time I was eating with them out in one of the villages. And one of the Indians said, you are like Imbara, which is, that group of Indians. And I said, and by the way, Imbara means the people in their language. Nobody even knows where they came from. They don't know where they came from because I ask them all the time. And I've asked like 100 Imbara, where do you come from? Nobody knows. but maybe Colombia. And so they said, you are like Imbara. And I said, because I'll eat everything they eat, and I can spot crocodiles as fast as they can. Because I used to catch alligators when I was a kid. You know what I mean? I used to catch them with my hands and shoot them and eat them, and you know what I mean. Like I'm happy with Imbra. I could go out and live with them, And so I mean, it's just like jungle rednecks, And so I get along with them great. And they're like, you're like Imbra, and I said, well, you're like my grandparents. You're just more brown. They're all laughing. I'm like, I'm serious. Why do you think I hang out with you guys so much? I like it. I mean, I'm there to research and stuff, but they can tell that I actually like them too. And which makes it even more sad because they are clearly being eroded with the same techniques and tactics and procedures that were used to take the American Indians. But now the Chinese are doing it to them, right? The Chinese and some other globalists are doing it to them, but especially the Chinese. And the information war down there is intense. They're making anyway, I could go on about the Indians there for hours. But at the end of the day, by the way, Scotland. I just noticed this. Scotland. This I got this in Nagasaki at the Glover house. I just thought about that. I'm sitting there using it as a coaster and on my table. And
Oh,
but I got it at the Glover house in Nagasaki. Glover was a Scottish dude who came to Nagasaki and he started a brewery and all. He's a huge trader, and not traitor, but trader, doing trade with ships, And so he's quite famous in Japan. He's very famous, right? And what's interesting is when we talk about globalism and the patterns, the Scottish tried to get in on the action of being globalist, and they weren't successful as much on the sorry, I spilled a little bit here. I don't want to wet the table, that'll stain my books later. And yeah, I keep the books separate. But he came to Japan and made huge changes in Japan. If you look up Glover in Japan, you'll see it's just an amazing story. But now let's go back to the Scottish in Panama. They tried to do a colony in Darien, and they called it New Edinburgh, or they call it New Caledonia. Those had different names, but and of course Caledonia is the old name for Scotland, right? And so they raised a bunch of money, just like the Jews Hertzel did. He's an atheist. Raised a bunch of money and to go, hey, let's take Israel. Let's take Palestine. Actually, they were calling it Palestine. And so raised a bunch of money to go take. So the Scottish, there's also books about this, which I have. The Scottish raised a bunch of money in Scotland to go take part of Panama to make a path between the seas, right? This is in the 1690s, right? So the Scottish go down to Darien. Darien, man, that's like Afghanistan of Central America, except instead of desert, it's straight up hardcore jungle with hardcore Indians and yellow fever and malaria and just all kinds of cooties, right? And I mean, this is what's called the dirty jungle. There's clean jungles and then there's dirty ones. This is a dirty one. It's filled with like stuff that wants to kill you, right? And it's not a friendly jungle. And there's nothing friendly about the Darien jungle. I still love it. And but so the Scottish go down there and they're trying to make a path between the seas, right? They end up in fights with the Indians, and then the Spanish thing was going on at the same time, and so they went bankrupt, right? So Scotland, the whole country went bankrupt. 2,000 dead Scots later from the Panama venture, the Darien venture. They called it the Darien. They ended up calling it a lot of things. The Darien scheme, the Darien catastrophe. They started calling it a lot of things. So 2,000 dead Scots later, Scotland was bankrupt, right? Because they raised a bunch of money and other things happened. So that's why Scotland got absorbed into the United Kingdom, right? In 1706, 1707. They were negotiating it and they finished it off in 1707, right? And so the Scottish, that's why Scotland is part of the United Kingdom today. That's when the United Kingdom started. The United Kingdom started because these guys, the Scottish, went bankrupt due to Darien, Panama. I'm telling you, man, Panama is like the Afghanistan where countries go to get rich and die. I mean, it's like so many people have had bitter experiences there, like the French trying to make their canal, and then it was terrible for the French. They made the Suez Canal, and they're like, we can do it. And they're like, okay, we went over to Panama. The French did, and I'm not French, I'm American. But the French went over to Panama after big on their experience in Suez, and they thought they could rule the world, as the song goes, and bankrupt, and huge scandals in France, and of course that was later. That was in the 1800s. And then Americans came in and were just arrogant enough to say we can do it, or the French can't do it, and we did it somehow. And I tell you, man, you go look at that canal, and it is a work of art. You know what I mean? That's not just engineering. There's engineering, and then there's engineering taken to the next level, art. That is art. But it takes a while to study the Panama Canal, and go look at the Panama Canal and fly over it in helicopters, which I often do, and go through it in boats and drive up and down it and look at how they did all this stuff. And you're like, this was a painting on the land almost, but they painted it with engineering. You know what I mean? It's just how the canal works is unbelievable. I mean, it has very few pumps. It doesn't need any pumps to operate the locks, right? The locks, they operate on gravity, right? Because it's not the Suez Canal. You just sail from one sea to the other, right? And so, because it's sea level, and the French thought they could do that in Panama, and they're like, "We'll just make a sea level canal." Apparently, they didn't do a proper survey, and because you ain't gonna make a sea level canal because they can be like a difference of like I don't know, like 20 feet or something. It's a huge difference, and you're going to end up with a tidal wave every day, and the tides change in the Pacific. The tides are higher in the Pacific, right? And like much higher, right? And so you're going to, anyway. And so they started to do that, and then they had all kinds of other problems. Yellow fever. Of course, at that time, we still didn't understand that mosquitoes were the vectors for yellow fever, malaria, all that stuff. We didn't know that at the time when the French were doing it. There were some people that suspected it, and every time somebody said, "Hey, it's the mosquitoes," people are like, "You're a nutcase." It's the mosquitoes. Get out of here with that. Why do people keep saying it's the mosquitoes? It's like, and it's clearly miasma, foul-smelling air. That's why miasma. That's why the doctors used to wear those beaks with the perfumes inside. That was to save them from the miasma. They all thought these diseases were caused by bad smelling air. That's where malaria got its name, malaria, bad air, right? So everybody thought it was malaria, bad air. When it was associated with the bad air, like swampland and stuff like that. These like cholera was. I got a book here on cholera. Cholera is amazing, man. I've read a lot about cholera. Cholera is associated with bad air because it's a sewage. It's a fecal route, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's the but in any case, all these different diseases that were blamed on miasma, malaria, but then finally that Cuban guy, what was his name? Carlos Finlay. He's a Cuban doctor, and he's like, "No, it's the mosquitoes." And again, people are like, crazy Cuban guy. And when did he say that? 1872 or something? I can't remember. And but anyway, it was back then. It was pretty early. And keep in mind, they didn't have great microscopes back then. And so finally, people are like, that Cuban dude was right. And not only was he right, he was very right. And we need to bring all the entomologists in and study how these mosquitoes work, right? So then you bring the entomologist army in because you need your entomologist. And they're key components of anything serious. And they're like, they started, there's like 50 different types of mosquitoes in Panama. That's how many they categorized at the time. I don't know how many they've categorized since then. And then they're like, yeah, these certain mosquitoes like Culex and Anopheles and Aedes aegypti, or Aedes, let's say, these are the truly really worst ones are, Aedes aegypti, or let's say Aedes, that group, and then Anopheles, of course, and Culex, right? And so these are a lot of the mosquitoes aren't really a problem for us. They're just mosquitoes. Just mosquitoes. But that's why like Bill Gates and whatnot are weaponizing mosquitoes now. They're like one of the ultimate vectors for killing people, right? They got red mosquitoes down in Argentina now, right? And they actually have an information war down there. Don't kill the red mosquitoes. And because you can't make up this stuff. And yet our military and Trump and everybody else is just like, oh, let them do it. Let them spray the chemicals in the air. A lot of people are like, no, they're not spreading chemicals in the air. That's a lie. They are spreading chemicals in the air. Period. Full stop. The question is, what is it? You know what I mean? And what exactly are they doing? I mean, the weather. When you mention weather modification, it shuts a lot of people down immediately because they associate that with global warming. The nutcases that are talking about cow farts, right? But those are, again, useful idiots. But the actual weather modification, that's extremely real. It's been real since before you and me were born. It was happening long before you and me were born. And I got a whole stack of books about it right here. And a lot of them are old, right? These are old books. So I mean, they do it on a regular basis and like daily, and so it's not a question of whether it happens or not. It clearly happens, but the information war makes it confusing, and people go, oh, well, here comes a weather nutter again. But weather is a major weapon, right? And I was talking with Dane Wigington yesterday, and I told him he studied the insect problem because I got a whole bunch of books here on insects. I don't know why I've always studied insects. I've read several books on bees and several books on ants, and ever since I was a kid, I thought the insects were quite cool and amazing. I even wrote an article called about stigmergic learning, which is what ants and stuff, how they're as a colony, they're incredibly smart. And I mean, they basically operate the way that we operate on a globalist thing. They make routes to the resources back to the end. And so you should see some of these ants I see out in the jungles. They're amazing, man. They make bridges and stuff. They're unbelievable. So at the end of the day, I've noticed, because I pay attention to insects, I've noticed that I see a lot fewer insects around the world, right? A lot. Like even in the Darien Gap jungle, I grew up in Florida, man. I grew up catching gators and fish and snakes and, you know, bugs and looking at bugs all the time because they're so cool and reading books about them and all that. And, and it's obvious to me that there's a great reduction in insects. I was out with Chuck Holton, a friend of mine up in Panama. He's got a home there, and we were up in El Valle, and it's a volcanic crater, and we were eating dinner, and I'm like, and it was like a jungly place. I said, wow, why are there so few insects here? He's up in Kazakhstan or someplace right now, probably looking for Borat. I don't know. He's up in one of those places. He's got some cool videos. But so we were eating dinner with Masako and Chuck. We were together in El Valle in Panama, and El Valle means the valley, right? And he's like, I said, there's so few insects here. I would expect to be just swamped by them. And he said, no, that means the environment's healthy. I'm like, well, that's not what that means, brother. That's not what it means. It means something's wrong. I mean, because this is what I'm seeing everywhere. There is a clear collapse of the mosquito of the insect pot. The other night I was going for a walk, and the other evening, as the sun had just gone down, and I saw a single bat here where I'm at in Japan. I'm like, there's the first bat I've seen, and I pay attention to bats, and I love watching bats. I've got some really cool bat photos I took in places like Nepal that I took with my modified camera and stuff, and so I pay attention to bats and stuff. And I just saw one when I was going for a walk the other day, and I'm like, that's the first bat I've seen in since when? Months at least. Well, I should be seeing I mean, Florida was like Batman country. You know what I mean? There was like so many bats, and but not here. It makes me want to go back to University of Florida. Not that I went there, but I used to live in that area. And they have at Lake Alice there. They've got these bat houses. These two or maybe, I need to look online and see if anybody's saying anything about those bats. I wonder. Now I'm told that the insect population over there seems to be. I don't know. You know what? I'm gonna check it out now. Now it's got my curiosity up. Is there any reduction in the population of those bats at Lake Alice at the University of Florida? I'm very curious about that now. I used to go and watch I'd watch the ibises and all those birds come in and go to the trees and their rookeries at night because they're cool. All these thousands of birds coming to the rookery. Because the diurnal and the nocturnal animals, they have like a shift change. Like morning Ralph, morning Fred. You know what I mean? They're like the sheep dogs that are changing shift. On the cartoon. Morning. So all the diurnal birds are going into their rookeries at night, and they're all going in real loud, and how they do. And then all the nocturnal birds and the bats are starting to go on their shift, right? It's a shift change. When the sun comes up and down, there's a huge shift change of animals and birds and stuff. And I love going out and watching the shift change. It's awesome. It's like, and so a good place to do that if you're in Gainesville is at Lake Alice, right where those bat houses are. So you go out on that little sort of walking area by Lake Alice, and you can watch all those white ibises come in, and watch all those gators come around, and then you can watch the bats come out. And if you watch the bats, um, when they start to leave at night, they first will send out a few recon bats. So at first you'll hear them. If you go underneath, you'll hear them squeaking up there. They're waking up. You can hear them start to squeak and waking up, and then if you sit there and watch long enough, there's some benches over there. There used to be. Just sit down and watch, and wait, and you'll see there will be one bat come out, and he'll kind of look around, and then he'll go back. He'll just for a minute. He'll just turn and go. I think he's doing a recon, right? Because flying squirrels do this too. I've seen flying squirrels do it in Florida. They'll the first one goes out. They start squeaking too. Flying squirrels do the same thing. Because I know where some live up in the Gainesville area, and you can go and listen to them. Oh, here it goes. Sun's, it's getting late in the afternoon. They're starting to squeak. They're waking up. Then they start rummaging around and doing their things. And then one of the little flying squirrels comes out, does a recon, and he'll check the tree that he lands on, and then he'll squeak back, and then he'll go to another tree, and another one replaces him. And before you know it, they all go out. The bats do the same. So the bats are like proper little Air Force. The Marines, the squirrels are Marines. Yeah, the squirrels are more terrestrial. But the bats. They'll send out a few recon bats. First, it'll be just one, and then more will come out. And before you know it, it's a flood. And then as they fly over Lake Alice, a lot of them will drop down and get a drink of water out of that lake, and then they'll head over to Payne's Prairie and gobble up insects all night and come back and come home. But what I'm getting to is I'm gonna check and see if that bat population has made any changes, because that would be interesting.
Yeah, that is certainly very interesting, Michael, just to hear about your perspective of how ecologically probably the environment's been poisoned quite a bit. Not just human health, but actually the just entire ecology of the planet probably has been affected quite a bit. I'm curious now, because I know you're big into personal responsibility, what every individual can do in terms of being prepared themselves. I don't want to term it like every person has to have 100% of the bases covered, but like, what do you think practically everyday people can do to kind of be better prepared for whatever comes next, whether it be, conflict breaking out in the United States itself, some kind of civil unrest, civil conflict, or even something like famines or things like that you mentioned might be coming down the pike that we really have not dealt with for quite some time. Maybe that's a good place to go now, is just what can people do to be prepared for whatever may come next?
Well, depending on because everybody's circumstance is different, obviously.
Yeah.
Some people already live on a farm, but some people live on a farm that grows only, say, corn. So I mean, plant a garden, as Chris Martinson, Dr. Chris Martinson always says, plant a garden. Like a victory garden, like my grandparents had, and I used to work in all the time. But that was normal. Everybody had. Actually, in Japan, a lot of people have gardens, and so, but not obviously like in Tokyo, but out in the places where they can have them, there's a lot of Japanese with gardens. But yeah, I mean, you have to think about your human network too, because only in the movies are you going to be out there alone doing a Rambo thing and doing great. It doesn't matter who you are. You're not going to do great alone. It doesn't matter if you're Rambo from the movie. You ain't going to do well alone, Rambo. You know what I mean? We're meant to be. We require teamwork, right? And that's why a lot of the more evil species of the globalists want to divide even our families, because they want to control us. They want us to be literal meat slaves, right? They can't do that when we have strong families. They can't do that when you have strong beliefs. They can't do that when you go to a church or a temple and you have strong relations with people that you study with and co-religionist, or I mean, it's hard to like a lot of Christians will not take a kneel to a lot of the, like, for instance, the people that were pushing alcohol in the Indians. A lot of Christians were really against that. But the people that wanted to just steal land, they're like, give them the firewater, then the land is easy. Not only that, we sell them the firewater, right? We sell them the firewater and they bring us beaver pelts, and then we take their land. This is a perfect plan, right? And the Christians are like, that's not really so good, I don't like that. In fact, I found in Guatemala, Christians were really angry at the people that were doing that, and they were fighting back. And they'd done the same in Japan. I mean, the Christians brought some bad stuff, and then they brought a lot of good stuff. Like I see where the missionaries are, people have better teeth all over the world. Because they're like, teaching them how to take care of your teeth, right? And so what I'm getting to with that is one of the things that's very helpful is a self-organizing place would be like at church, right? I mean, it's a place where people have. It's generally you're not going to find a bunch of druggies at church. You're not going to find, because I'm telling you, you can't have druggies under your roof. It's like getting a missile through your roof. You can't. The drugs and the alcohol will destroy your family, especially when things go badly. Because when things go badly, they'll just go to the chemicals more, right? So you got to get people off of those chemicals. There are some really great people out there. Jerry Spence just died. He was a famous lawyer. I've read 12 of his books. And Jerry Spence, how old was he? Was he 96 when he died? I read 12 of his books. I learned so much from him. But one of the things he said in at least one of his books is he used to be a severe alcoholic when he was younger, right? And he overcame it. And then he became a severe warrior and very effective in the courtroom against the things that the major corporations would do to people. And he used to warn constantly about what's actually happening now. But he had a problem for a while there. He had, I don't know, it must have been like 10 years. He was running through some pretty high turbulence, put it that way. And then he overcame it. He was so bad off, he failed his bar exam to, become a lawyer. And in those days, apparently, if you failed your bar exam, you were like below trash. You know what I mean? But he tried it again and he passed it. And then he was losing his original case. And early on, he was losing his cases. He was like, I was a terrible lawyer, drank, all these things. And then finally, he met his wife, this is actually similar to what happened with Nathan Bedford Forrest. When he met his wife, actually Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the most serious generals in U.S. history, and he used to drink a lot and smoke and all that, but he met this pretty girl, and her mother, this would be like in the 1800s, her mother would not let him get close to her until he stopped drinking and stopped smoking and came to church. So he actually stopped drinking and stopped smoking and came to church to get the girl, and it worked. He married her. And so he was happy, lived happily ever after, except did a huge amount of war. And he was an incredible general. But yeah, that guy. And then a whole different story. But the thing is Jerry Spence was like that. Jerry Spence was like a ne'er-do-well, you might say, and he drank too much and was just acting like an idiot, and then overcame that, found a great wife, married for life, you know what I mean, and just was slaying corporate fighters. Man, he would go after the FBI and rip them apart. He was unbelievable, but he had to overcome that stuff. So what I'm saying is, just because somebody's addicted to something, it doesn't mean they're a bad person or something. You got to get rid of that demon. You got to get the demon out of the house, not the person. And once that demon's gone, they might be the strongest person on the whole team. You know what I mean? like Jerry Spence. And what if he had been thrown out, or so many of these other guys that turn out to be actually in women that turn out to be quite serious people. But you got to, bottom line, you got to. Anybody that's in your network that's on that crap, you got to get that crap out of the house, right? And out of the network. And everybody watching this either has had that problem or knows somebody very close that has, because it is that prevalent that everybody, I have never met somebody that didn't experience this problem firsthand, right? Either under their own roof or it affected them greatly. But once it's overcome, next thing you know, they're like a rocket ship sometimes, and so you got to overcome that. So work to overcome that through all mechanisms possible, right? And take an inventory of everybody's skills and get together and talk about things and study things. It's very important for everybody to pick their own field of study, get around a table like this beautiful table I'm at here, and we get around this table and we discuss things, right? Because when you're around a lot of people who study, then we're more powerful together. Like when I take Masako out to places, I've been doing this a lot longer than Masako, but she always sees things that I don't see. And so she like very subtle things and insightful and important things. So we have to work as teams. We have to take an inventory of the skills of the people and the weaknesses of the people and be honest, like, what are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. One friend of mine, he's an old special forces guy. He said he took an inventory of the people in his church, right? And he's made a spreadsheet, like, what do they know how to do? Knows how to do roofing, knows how to do plumbing, knows how to do this or that or whatever, right? Mechanics or and this one grandmother, great grandmother, she didn't know how to do anything, she said. She was all despondent. She's like, I don't know how to do anything. And he's like, you're a great grandmother. You know how to do a lot of things. There ain't, and she had a successful family. You know what I mean? He's like, you didn't raise that family by not knowing how to do stuff. Let's talk about it. So she well, I know how to can food, and he's like, bingo. I mean, we don't even need to go further. I mean, canning food.
Yeah.
I mean, the young people don't know how to do that, right? That's a basic skill. And he said, just tell me what you need, what kind of pressure cookers you want, and don't be skinsy. Don't get the cheap stuff. Buy once, cry once. We need quality products. How many jars, lids, salt? What do you need? Vinegar? Well, tell me what you need. Make a long list, right? And make it a professional list, because you will be in charge of canning operations, not to be the one who does it, but the one who teaches people how to do it, to check the lids, to know how to do this stuff, to know how, this is like my grandmother taught me how to do it, and because that was normal because we had our own garden, right? So you need to know how to can. And so a lot of people discount these skills that they have and they just take it for granted that you know how to do canning, and that's a big skill to have. You know what I mean? That's important. And so, and so organize, be a leader and organize the people around you, find out what the skills they got and make sure everybody knows what the other skills the other people have. Because a lot of times, like, you'll have a lot of skills in your head. I don't know what they are. You know what I mean? You might know how to do all kinds of really important stuff, but how can I know by looking at you? And you might just assume all I know how to do is photography and writing and reading books, but I know how to do a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? And I can catch alligators. You know what I mean? I can catch rabbits. I can catch fish. I can, you know what I mean? I can shoot deer. I can do all kinds of stuff. I can do strategic reconnaissance. You know what I mean? And I can call people up who are going to be running for president next time. But there's a lot of things I can do. And but you can't tell that by looking at people, and we have to take inventory on a very basic level. I mean, tell me about your skills from top to bottom. You know how to make shoes? That's a pretty big deal. You know what I mean? Because it could be a time when knowing how to make shoes I don't want to run around wearing inner tubes on my feet. That's very important. Very important. And so make sure books. I published a photo on my Substack recently of me up in Nepal, like before I went to the wars. And I have a Pelican case with a University of Florida sticker on it, actually. And that was my books and candles, because I love candles and I read by candlelights. I had a Pelican case filled with books and candles, right? Because I walked around out in the Himalayas so much you wouldn't believe it. And so I walked up the Mount Everest twice, just to the bottom. I did Annapurna several times, so there I am with this horse I got, because I couldn't carry those books, man. This is before iPads. But the thing is with like iPads and these tablets, they can rewrite your electronic books, right? But they can't rewrite these. They can't rewrite these. Remember, and there's the book burnings now. The book burnings now happen in subtle ways, right? They can, on your iPad, like I have ebooks, they can rewrite those books. I can open the book and it's been rewritten since the last time I opened it. And I mean, they can rewrite it in the background without me knowing. They can change keywords. I bought a map recently in Nagasaki, an old map. I bought two of it. I bought one that's a new one and one that's an old one. And I bought those because the old original map, there were certain words on it that are politically incorrect now. They're in Japanese. But it was like, this is where the low-class people live. But the new map that's a copy is missing those words. So it's subtle stuff like that. That's why get books. Get the books. The older you can get, the better. Like all the stuff you need to know, a lot of it's written in books that were written like 300 years ago. You don't need to get books that old, but like Foxfire books or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of books that you can read and get on print. Get physical books and spend a lot of time in those books. And when it comes to learning, you need to read and you have to go there and you have to do things. Read, go, do, and teach. When you really start learning, like you've heard how many teachers have said, I didn't really start to learn until I started to teach. And at first, when you're young, and I kept hearing that, and I'm like, that sounds kind of crazy. You sound pretty smart to me. And they're like, well, that's because I've been teaching you guys all this time. And every question you ask, I got the answer to. And I sound like a genius because before I met you, I taught thousands of other people, and they already asked me all these questions. So I know all the answers. So it sounds like I'm a computer, but I'm really, I learned by teaching because you found all the holes in my knowledge. And then I filled in those holes. And now it's very rare that a new student asks me something that hasn't been asked before. So read, do, go, and teach. As I start teaching canning, you're going to learn more about canning. You're going to learn because somebody's going to ask, well, why don't we do it like this? And then you research it. You're like, yeah, that's a good idea. We should change.
Yeah, thank you so much for your input, Michael, in terms of what everyday people can do to be better prepared. I know you're very active on Substack, very active on Twitter. I'll put links to both of these in the video description below, but let my subscribers, viewers know where they can find you, how they can hear more from you.
I'm about to put something on Substack. I'll take a break and come back here and publish something on Substack. And so Substack is the best place. And so I've been doing this. I started a blog in 2005, right? So ever since that time, for now 20 years, I've been reader supported. That's it.
Wow.
Everybody's tried to hire me. New York Times, all these guys. Nope. I've kept my independence. I'm too born to be wild. You know what I mean? I like to just go walk in the mountains with my candles and my books.
They can't buy you. They can buy Joe Rogan, but they can't buy you.
No, I got the Scots Irish gene. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like born to be free. It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and the thing is no matter how much money he's got, he's still a slave. He's a slave.
Yeah.
And they can cut him off like that. And he's fungible and he's nothing without them. As many MSM people have learned, because he's basically MSM. He's basically mainstream media. He's not like a alternative media. He's a different evolutionary, emergence of mainstream. He's just and a lot of these people they've tried to strike off on their own, and very few of them do well. They realize like, wow, I left New York Times and I can't get a publisher, that sort of stuff. Right.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I'm glad to hear that you are able to publish work on Substack, just still able to make your voice heard. And I thank you so much for your time today.
Let's do it again sometime. And next time I'll let you talk. I'll be quiet.
Thank you so much, Michael. Have a great day.
Have a good day.